Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you here. Welcome to the library this afternoon, and welcome to those of you who are watching the program via the live stream option. I just want to thank the Northwest Arkansas Beekeepers Association for partnering with the library to offer this series. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to the experts.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank the library. The library is a great resource for everything, of course. That's what libraries do. But we've also got the corner over there, the far left corner, or it'd be the southeast corner of the old part of the library, where we've got a bee display, lots of bee books over there. The association is actually giving the library a new bee book that was donated by Dadant and Company. We're gonna do the same format that we've done in the past. They haven't moved the restrooms; they're still in the same place. We're gonna have 3 speakers, and in between each speaker, we will have, in between the first and second speaker, we'll have a break. At the end of the third speaker, which is me, we're gonna have door prizes, so you have your tickets. And we've got a ton of door prizes. Almost everybody's going to walk away with something. And I want to announce now, but we'll announce later, that March 14th is the first of this year's Bee Association meetings, and you're all welcome to come. And there'll be more about that later. Other than that, I don't think I have any announcements. So Ian is our first speaker again, and we're glad he's here.
Thank you, Ed. So I hope that the ones that have assisted in the former 2 presentations or work seminars, that you wrote down a lot of questions so that we can discuss those later on in the round table. Today we are touching an area that should not push you away from the bees, okay? But when we talk about diseases and parasitic infestations and viral challenges, these are, issues that we confront nowadays in our beehives in the United States and basically worldwide, especially the mite infestations that came from Southeast Asia have spread worldwide, to Australia or to New Zealand or to the Pacific Islands that were very isolated, okay, with all the international traffic. Everybody is getting their share of the parasites. Before you buy, or say sell, or move a hive, and when you go into beekeeping, try to register your hive with the Arkansas Plant Board. Here is the phone number of the apiary section. You can phone them. You can also go online on this webpage, to get a template that you fill in and that you send up so that you have your site registered. There are several inspectors, normally 2 inspectors for the north half of the Arkansas state. It's now Jacob Bates. Here's his phone number. So whenever you think that your hives are compromised, you see some diarrhea or you see a lot of dead bees, okay, you can call him, or of course you can call the Northwest Arkansas Bee Club, and we can help you out and see if there is really an issue. Anyhow, every year if you have your bee yard being inspected by the Arkansas inspector, you can get a sheet, and on that sheet you will have a lot of these tickets that permit you to move a hive to another location or to sell your hive to somebody that's interested. And together with all these tickets, you get this certificate of health for your bee yard. So it's always good to have this so that you have a peace of mind and you know that you're doing the right thing, with your beehive, bee yard. Responsibilities. Okay, when we talk about diseases, okay, you are the first bee inspector. So you need to really go regularly into your hives, observe them and see what's going on. So you're the first line of defense, yeah, and you need to learn what a healthy colony looks like, how the bees behave, if everything is clean, okay, and if you recognize a problem, yeah, call somebody that can help you, yeah, or you know, become a bee club member so that you are always up to date with the latest developments. This is a general statement that I love to use. Okay, fungus, bacteria, viruses, protozoa, beetles, moths, mites always lurk in the shadows, yeah, to pounce colonies when neglect, starvation, robbing lets down defenses. Yeah, these forms of parasitism try to prey constantly on our colonies. So you have a hive, you have a dog, you have a cat, you need to take care of them. Okay, so here you see a frame with basically bees starving. Here you see some pollen on the outside. Normally the bees accumulate here also honey, okay, and then in the center they leave a little bit open, but you see there's nothing on this frame and probably on the other side of the frame, yeah, and bees then over time, yeah, starve. And this happens a lot in the early spring or late winter, yeah, when the reserves are being depleted. We have a lot of variation in temperature. Bees come out, they fly, use up a lot of energy, yeah, and if you have not enough store in the hive, or if you are not feeding your bees on days when you have a temperature of, let's say, 60 degrees Fahrenheit and up, yeah, so that they can replenish the hive with a 2-to-1 sugar solution, then you probably will lose your hive. Okay? Natural defenses. An individual bee has basically no defense. Okay? Here you see a spider taking care of a bee. Okay? Here you have the hornet, yeah, which is also an Asian insect that preys a lot on the bees, but the colony, yeah, can do its part also. Okay, all these bees cover the hornet, increase the temperature so that the hornet succumbs later on. Yeah, so in group, bees can defend themselves. Alone, very difficult. Now, our honeybees nowadays are under constant threat. I would say before 1980, we could put a hive in our garden and really the hive would do pretty well. But we have been, you know, infestated with the small hive beetle coming from the Sahel areas, countries in Africa. We have the Varroa Mites coming from Southeast Asia. We have the Tracheal Mite coming from Southeast Asia. Okay, then we have viruses, which are a lot transmitted by these mites. Okay, and then bacteria, yeast, and fungi, which have a lot to do with the water sources that these bees visit. Okay, so diseases in adult bees, we are not going over all the diseases. We will talk about the principal important ones. First is Nocema. This is a microscopic protozoa, just like malaria, which is a protozoa. Okay, a one-cellular organism. Contamination possibilities are water holes or water areas, robbing bees that are contaminated and infecting different hives, drifting bees, fecal material on frames and combs will give you already a very clear indication something is wrong with my hive. Okay, and also fecal material on hive components and the bottom board entrances. So normally in the winter, these bees come out of a small entrance. So when you start seeing around this entrance a lot of dirty droppings or a type of diarrhea, then be very watchful and go in the hive on a very nice day to see what's happening inside. Then we have the amoebas. This is a single cell organism, just like the protozoas. Okay, the main culprit is the Malpighi amoeba mellificae. They form spores or cysts. Yeah, and here you see the transmission is when these cysts are being ingested by bees, and one of the areas that is often infected is water sources. Okay, so water sources comes back here, comes back in the first Nocema issue. So these amoebas are normally seen in combination with Nocema. You know, it lowers the defenses of the colony, and then other parasitic organisms enter and affect the hive. Dysentery, not caused by microorganism, but simply because of poor food, can be confined for long periods. You know, bees don't defecate in the hive. Okay, so when we have a very nice day, and in the summer, during a normal winter, bees go outside en masse and defecate outside, so they keep their house clean. Okay, when we have fermented stores, okay, so if you have nectar that has not been properly cured by the bees, okay, it could cause dysentery. Diluted syrup, you know, we normally use 2 to 1. If you feed too much 1 to 1, it's too much diluted, you get faster contamination of that 50% sugar solution. Too much moisture in the hive, so you need a certain amount of ventilation in your hive, yeah, so that all the moisture that's produced inside is coming out, and then the honeydew. If the bees produce nectar and later honey from honeydew, is highly contaminated, or can be highly contaminated, and causing later on issues, intestinal issues in the bees. Then we have septicemia, infection of different bacteria, yeah, that are in the hemolymph or the blood of the bees. And the most common bacteria, Pseudomonas. Transmission again through contact, soil, water, and other infected bees. So from these different diseases in adult birds, the conclusion is, okay, control these diseases with a good water source. Okay, we mentioned this in the first Saturday of our presentation. Water is extremely important, yeah, for good livability. And here you see a little bit what I mean with a good water source. So this is what I use at home. You can use many different forms. Ed suggested to have a dripping faucet outside, very slow dripping. Can help also. You know, I find this very encouraging because I know exactly, yeah, how many bees are coming. This type of water source has one disadvantage in the summer. A lot of birds will come and they will take their bath in there. Okay, so they dirty it. So you will, in the summer, need to keep this more clean and replenish the water with some drops of chlorine so that you keep it nicely disinfected. Then we have Nocema. So we go a little bit more in this disease because it's a very serious one. It's a spore-forming organism, invades the intestinal midgut, found worldwide. So everywhere in the world, Nocema can show up. Most prevalent in the early spring. Greatly reduces the lifespan of all caste of bees. I would say with 50% the lifespan of the bees, and you have a honey yield reduction of around 40%. So it's very important that you control this type of disease. Spores are viable for 1 year, yeah, and again the drinking areas are often contaminated. Nurse bees are not able to produce enough food brood, so the hive cannot sustain itself. Bees seen trembling, starving, the hive is restless. Okay, you see that when observing how the bees behave. And then you see droppings on the combs, on the top bars, at the entrance. And then it could be confused with dysentery or diarrhea, yeah, in your bees. The wings are also positioned in various angles from the body and are not properly folded. Okay, so this is what you will see on your top bars. Okay, a lot of basically diarrhea, and here on the outside, this is at the entrance. Okay, and this is another picture where you see that there is a very serious issue with Nocema. The control, you can use an antibiotic, fumagillin. It's often used preventively, probably by large beekeepers. I've never used it in the last 13 years that I have bees. I never had any issue with any disease besides mites. Okay? Provide fresh, clean water with the Boardman feeder in front of the hive. Locate hives to sunny sites to protect it from cold winds. So normally we put the hives with the entrance to the east or to the south, and always try to put it in such a position, especially in the winter, that in the early morning up till, let's say, 4 o'clock, you know, the sun hits the hives. It will activate the bees much quicker. If you are feeding a sugar solution, normally they don't take that immediately. It will take them probably 1 or 2 days to find it, okay, and then they will go full on that food source. You can requeen the hive, have enough storage of pollen, honey, and feed heavy syrup. Okay, we already discussed this in earlier presentations. Yeah, and in early fall, also use some protein supplements, if possible, to generate the last generation of young bees before the colony goes into the winter. Check frames and dirty ones with droppings replace. Improve hive ventilation with having an upper hive opening. So normally in the upper, let's say, deck of your hive, you use a small opening so that there is always a certain ventilation, yeah, within your hive. You know, heat stratifies, so goes up, okay, and with that, humidity is taken out of the hive. Heat treat infected empty frames to 120 degrees Fahrenheit or 49 degrees Celsius for 24 hours in case you want to salvage any of your frames and replace the foundation. Now, diseases in bee brood. We have one notorious one, which is the American Falbrood, or AFB. This is called by a bacterium, also producing spores and has a vegetative form. Very destructive brood disease. Spores maintain infective for 69 or 70 years. So that means if you have the problem and you store your equipment and one of your grandkids wants to start up with bees, those spores can still be viable and cause a problem. Transmission: infected bee suits, tools, equipment, diseased frames. Move to clean hives. Okay, we often, when we have several hives, we move frames around. Okay, because you need to work with your colonies, improving weak ones with some frames, for example, from strong ones. So when you move then these frames around, you could, in theory, move also diseases around. Okay. Bees cleaning out diseased cells because they are very hygienic, and then spreading the bacteria and going from one hive to the other hive with robber bees, or, you know, getting a swarm that is infected. Then we have the European Falbrood, not as serious, but also caused by a spore-forming bacteria. Can be treated. Yeah, the transmission of this bacteria is present in cells, in honey, in pollen, and that's used for feeding the larvae. And here also contaminated equipment and bee suits, yeah, is one of the areas that you need to cover and could be a source for transmission. Then we have a fungal disease like Falbrood. Spores also viable up to 15 years of age. So these are all nasty diseases. Transmission, spores transmitted from bee to bee at food exchange. Here we again have contaminated combs and tools, bee suits, wind, soil, dust, infected queen, robbers. Okay, so from these three very serious bacterial diseases and one fungus, okay, your conclusion is you need to have biosecurity, you need to work with clean bee suits and equipment. That means that if you get visitors, okay, that are also beekeepers, don't let them come with their equipment, let them use your equipment, yeah, so that you reduce the chance that an infestation or an infection is being brought to your bee yard. American Falbrood, we will go a little bit more in this one because it's a very serious one. So it's very highly contagious. You got a shotgun pattern that you see over here with some capped brood, but this one are all cells that have been infested or infected with the bacillus. Sunken cappings, holes in the cappings, turns from white into brown. You get a very nasty content within these cells. Stringy or ropey consistency, eventually forms a dark scale. It has an odor like a glue pot. It's very sticky, tightly adheres to anything that you put into the cell, and then you can send it to a laboratory for verification. Okay, so what do we do per prevention? Frequent inspection, care and reuse of used comps and equipment. So if you buy from somebody else the equipment, let an inspector first check if all the equipment is okay before you bring it to your bee yard, because you could bring with a nice colony also a disease. Care and exchanging materials between colonies. Preventive, you could use terramycin as a preventive measure, yeah, but spores are very resilient, and normally what we say, yeah, you need to burn your infected equipment. So basically you lose everything that you have built over maybe several years if you get this Falbrood into your hive. Yeah, so this Falbrood resembles a little bit of anthrax. Everybody has heard about that spore-forming bacteria. So a very serious issue in our bees. This is the way I constantly sterilize or disinfect my hive tools, okay, over a fire for at least a minute, okay, so that you can even with a small piece of paper clean off all the glue that sticks to your hive tools constantly. So you need to keep this in good shape. There are different hive tools. This one here is of a better material and seems to be inox, while this one oxidates and gets more dirty. So the fire will keep it clean. Viral diseases in bees. We have 18 known viruses. And there are, against the virus, there's no treatment. Yeah, we know that about the COVID virus. Okay, so you need to use biosecurity. Yeah, the mask is one, and vaccination. Yeah, to keep it under control. Bees can have a predisposition against certain viral diseases. There's always a genetic component also. Transmission, viruses are omnipresent worldwide. They enter the bees where there is a major susceptibility, okay? And when vectors transport these viruses to the hives, and one of these major vectors is the mite, okay? So mites are a perfect way to get into the beehives. There are 6 different bee viruses that we know presently that can affect our hives. We have sac brood, we have acute bee paralysis. So you really see that the bees cannot move around very well. Also transmitted through the mite, inflicted wounds. So if these mites really cause a wound and these mites are infected with the virus, they basically inject directly that virus into the bloodstream or the hemolymph of the bees. And then, of course, you know, the infection will be considerably more severe. The Kashmir bee virus, transmitted and activated also by mites, and then debilitating the bees, and then the cloudy wing virus, deformed wing virus, transmitted also by the Varroa Mites. So you see that the mites here are basically the main cause why we have a lot of viral diseases in our bees. So control of mites is essential. So this is the deformed wing disease. Here you see a normal bee with the wing, and you see over here that these wings are hardly present. Now we go to the parasites, because that is, besides Nocema and American Falbrood, our main issue. I would say mites is the issue that we have nowadays in our bee colonies. We have a tracheal mite, Acarapis woodi. It's a natural host of Apis cerana. Apis cerana is the Asian bee strain, and has been transported worldwide with all the export of stuff throughout the world. Then we have the Varroa, we call it Varroa Destructor. Also the natural host in general is the Apis cerana, and the Apis cerana is a smaller bee, has more hair, grooms more, protects itself by that much more. But our European honeybee, Apis mellifera, is much more, is bigger, has less hair, grooms less, and is thus much more susceptible. The tracheal and the Varroa mites, transmission by migratory beekeepers, especially those, commercial beekeepers, they can transmit and bring over large distances in a very short time these mites from one place to the other. Packages that one can buy and that are not clean, and then interaction of bees between different apiaries that are fairly close by. Then we have some other parasitic bees, Varroa. This is the natural host is the Apis florea, also from Southeast Asia. Up till now, I don't think we have it in the United States, but it's probably a question of time before these also start spreading around. It's smaller than Varroa, and affects only the drone brood. And then we have the Tropilelaps clare, also from Southeast Asia, or from a larger bee, Apis dorsata, and it feeds mainly on the brood and not on the adult bees. So the Varroa Destructor is our main enemy that we nowadays try to combat all the time. So here we see this mite, and this mite you see here also on top of the bee, and you need to compare this mite as a tick the size of your fist, that you have on your breast or on your leg, and that is sucking your blood. So you can imagine a mite the size of your fist will debilitate your body considerably, and then some of these bees have 2 mites on them. So it really affects them tremendously. Here you see in a cell, where the pupae is developing. Here you see some mites, and here you see them when the larvae, before they're being kept, you see some of the mites. And here you see them a little bit closer up, so you see there's a lot of hair that they use. It's a mean small bugger, but happily you can see it with your bare eyes, and we will have a look on that later on. So here you have very quickly the life cycle of the Varroa mite. So here you have the different stages from being born up to the adult phase. And then here you see in the development of the bees, the queen laying an egg. First day the egg is standing right up, okay, then it falls down, it's horizontal, then a larva develops. The worker or the nurse bees are feeding the larva grow, and at 8 days, because at 9 days the cells is being kept, just before the cells are being kept, the female Varroa mite goes in, hides below the larva, then we get the pupa, okay, over here it's on the bottom, okay, it's nicely closed, so now at 11-12 days of age it starts laying an egg, and then the first egg is produced after 60 days, and then after that every 30 days another egg is being produced. So by 18 days of age we have up to 5 eggs in the pupa, okay, and then when the new bee emerges at 21 days of age, this is a worker bee, she takes out all the mites that have developed properly, and normally we talk about 2 or 3 mites that go out. The male stays inside. Normally this mite, female mite that invades the cell will produce the first egg, will be a male, and then there will be only females. And the male will fertilize the females within the cell, okay, and then basically only the females will emerge with the bee and start the infestation in other cells or in other bees. So what is the infestation threshold? You need to know your infestation rate by checking your hives regularly. I use it, I try to do it once or twice a month just to have an idea what is happening, and I will show you a little bit how we do it. I use a sticky bottom board. It's not the best way to do it, okay, but it has some inherent advantages. You need some practice to start identifying how many mite drops, natural mite drops, because these mites, they also jump from one bee to another, and if they don't jump correctly, they drop, and then they drop through your screen bottom board on your sticky board below. They cannot walk away, so after 2 or 3 days you can count them. So normally 2 or 3 mites natural drop per day in spring is your threshold, and then 10-15 per day, in the end of the summer. Now this way I can see, I do not disturb the bees. I don't need to go into the hives. Remember, we are now in the middle of the winter. I don't like to open up the hives, okay? So if I have a sticky board under the hives, I can see what is happening within the hive. So I'm also not killing any bees. I confirm if there is a laying queen. Basically, I can see how dirty is my sticky board. Where are my bees located in my deep brood box? Are they in the front? Are they occupying half or totally the whole brood box? Then I have a very strong colony. Or I have almost no dirty stuff on my sticky board, and that means that probably the hive is not very strong and could be a hive that maybe doesn't survive the winter. I can also see if there are intestinal problems. Remember Nocema. I can see what is falling on top of my sticky board. If there is diarrhea, I will see that immediately, okay? And I can see the activity again of my hive on the bottom board. I can see if there are hive beetles. Okay, for example, if your colony reduces considerably in size, these hive beetles from the Sahel area, they like the heat, they don't handle the cold very well. I get them dropping on my sticky board. and I can know exactly which hives have most of the small hive beetles. A sugar roll method. Here you basically try to push 300 bees in a jar with powdered sugar. You mix them around, and then 12 to 25 mites is a certain threshold. Another way is to use alcohol instead of sugar. You will kill now the bees, but it's easier. The mites will come off the bee is much easier, so it's more accurate to count what is your infestation rate in your hive. Now here is one of these sticky boards. You see there are mites, all these black dots are mites. Okay, so you see here 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is a fairly strong colony. Okay, and then I consider this a severe infestation, and then only on the left side of this arrow you have 30 mites. So you can imagine that on this sticky board you have a few hundred mites. Okay? Now this is from last week. Here you see a hive where there is only activity in the front of the hive, right? Because here I got some dirty stuff. Okay, so here is in between the hives, okay, and these are all hive beetles. So if the colony, the bee colony, is reduced in size, okay, it is colder within part of the hive. These hive beetles don't survive and they drop down, on your sticky board. Now look at this one. Also severe, 616 mites. Okay, and this is in 3-day period. Okay, and then normally what we say, you need to multiply this by 50 to have an idea how much of your infestation is in the hive. Okay, but that is normally more in the summer, when a lot of the mites are also in the cells reproducing. Okay, if I do this in the early spring or in the winter, then there is no brood. So all my mites are on the bees. And if I then treat my hive, for example, with oxalic acids, I will probably catch more than 95, 99%, I hope, of all the mites that are in this phoretic stage on the bees, and that then fall on the sticky board. Okay, so I use my wife. She has a very good eye. Okay, so she does this job over here all the time, and I bring the sticky board supply sheets to her. Okay, so here on this one we have 148 mites. Here you see this is more in spring. Here you see a very active hive. You see exactly, okay, this is where the frame is, and this is between the frames. So you see a lot of pollen. So for a 3-day period, you get a fairly dirty sticky board. Okay, and then it will become a little bit more difficult to find the mites. So what I do then, I switch over to a daily check. Then I can very quickly count the mites. I clean off with a piece of paper the sticky board, and I put it under the hive again for 3 days in a row. Okay, so that's another way to do it. If you use the alcohol method, okay, here the jar, okay, you see here all the mites that were on the bees, okay, and here we are opening up some of the drone brood where the mites accumulate more than in the worker brood, okay, just to see a little bit what is the infestation rate. So you can have a lot of pleasure by analyzing this when you have beehives. It's part of the game. So then you can start putting all these numbers basically in a small graph and trying to find out what is your infestation rate. And of course in the early spring you want to have it as low as possible, and then with the queen laying a lot of eggs, your strongest hives will have a higher infestation rate than weaker hives, yeah, the mites count will start building up. Here I got 7, but 7 is nothing. Okay, here you see in 2020, in 12 colonies, the average of the mite drop. So February I'm 0, in March I'm 0, April I'm 0, then I get 1, 1, 1. Now 1 and 1 doesn't mean that you have only one mite. It means that you have, okay, a fairly low infestation. But you can have several hundred mites in your colony with only one mite drop. But then you get to August, the end of August, now it goes from 3 to 31 to 48. Oh no, that's way too high, so we do an oxalic acid treatment. And after the oxalic acid treatment, it drops to 7, 11, and then normally 3 weeks later you do another treatment. And in this treatment I got 177 on average, yeah, and then afterwards, okay, in the 1st of November I check, I have only 19. Okay, so this is one of the ways you can constantly check, yeah, what is going on in the hives. Now many people tell me, I don't have mites. I don't have mites. And I said, how often do you check? Oh, never. So if you don't check, you will not find, okay? So here you see a bee with 2 mites, okay, which is a very serious issue. Varroa control, you can do freezing your drone brood. You can make some frames where drone is being accumulated. The drones come out after 24 days, so the mites have a few more days compared with the worker bees that come out at 21 days to mature. So instead of 2 or 3 mites, we have maybe 4 or 5 mites that can come out. So they prefer the drones. So we can use the frames with the drone brood. If you have a heavy infestation, you just take them out, you freeze them, and you kill them. Regularly evaluating the hives gives more natural mite drop. So if I have a cold day and I put my sticky board on my hive, I could have 0 mite drop. But if I have a nice day and the bees are active, I will have more activity in my hive and there is more natural drop of mites. So you need to bear that into account. Treatment with soft chemicals. So these are mostly the acids. So organic acids like formic acids. We have thymol, which is an essential oil. It's very popular. We have oxalic acid, plant-based. 3.5 grams is used per hive. So I use 3.5 grams in basically a 50 cc solution of 1:1 water sugar. Okay, and then between the frames, I put 5 ml. I got 10 openings. 5 times 10 is 50 cc, 50 ml. I'm doing everything metric. Oxalic acid is probably one of the most effective products. I use them 2-3 times a year, okay, to control the infestations. Are we going to get rid of Varroa mite? No, never. Because the Varroa mite is the natural parasite for the bees. So they will adapt, but we need to control it, okay? And there are several ways to do that, okay? One, when we use oxalic acid, you can use the gasification of the hive. Okay, basically you evaporate a certain amount of oxalic acid within your hive. I've tried it, I don't like it. You are dependent on the wind. You need to be very careful that you don't inhale that stuff yourself because it's toxic. Okay, so I use the drip method, which is very secure, which is this last method, where basically I prepare per hive, okay, if the hive is full, my 50 ml of 1:1 solution with 3.5 grams of oxalic acid, and I drip that on top of the bees between the frames, okay, so that the mites, and they say it is, they ingest basically the oxalic acid through their legs, which they cannot handle. That's the way they die, and then they fall on your sticky board. Sticky board I put in immediately, and then 3 days later I count all the mites. So I know exactly if my treatment with oxalic acid was effective. Hard chemicals or miticides, they are lipophilic, chemicals absorbed by fat and lipids. Resistance has developed in mites from prolonged use. The small beekeepers normally don't use them. We are basically always against it. You want to work as clean as possible with the least amount of chemicals. So we use mainly soft chemicals and not hard chemicals. So hard chemicals are normally used more with the commercial beekeepers. A chronic exposure to a low dose over time can affect bee health, okay, of these miticides. So you put them into the hive for a certain period of days, and then you need to take them out. Cannot be used during the honey flow because you are getting these hard chemicals in your honey, okay, and then you use them for human consumption. So that is a no-no. Hard chemicals are absorbed in the wax. That's another negative point. So basically your wax is now contaminated. If you are going to reuse your frames every year, you basically are contaminating with low dosage probably of these hard chemicals your honey. Having consistent program against Varroa Mite, and I think Ed is going to talk about the IPM, Integrated Pest Management, so various factors that you're going to use to control Varroa. So mite infestations are a key cause of colony losses. I think that's my personal opinion over the last 12, 13 years. So I try to control it as well as possible to avoid all these other bacterial and viral diseases that can affect our bee colonies. Bee selection for hygienic behavior. Okay, this is medium long term, but it's very interesting. We have some genetic crosses, where we try to find out which queen passes on to the offspring a very hygienic behavior. That means cleaning out the cells that are contaminated. Okay, so the reproduction of mites is simply more pronounced in highly productive hive colonies. So beware that if you have a weak hive, you probably won't find a lot of mites. If you have a very highly productive hive that produces 100 pounds in a season, you probably get also, because of the high amount of reproduction, many more mites in that colony. Selecting for better queen is, I think, very important. You cover then also a gentle behavior. You don't want to have aggressive bees in your garden. Okay, you want to have a hive that you can walk up to, get very close by, can work even with. Low swarming instinct. We don't want to lose our bees to our neighbors or somebody else. You want a high productivity. Most of us, when we start with bees, we like to extract some honey at the end of the season, to use. And then activity based on temperature. I like to have a hive that comes out at 55 degrees Fahrenheit and not at 65. Okay, those bees are more active and can do much more, especially in early spring, to accumulate food resources into the hive. These are the last slides. This is an idea how I analyze my bee yard. Here you see the accumulation of the sticky board evaluation. And these are the number of hives that were on the sticky board after 3 days. These are the different families that I have. I did an oxalic acid treatment on the 11th of February, and 3 days later I did a mite count. So I had an average of 1. Okay, this is a strong hive. Okay, and I got 58 mite drops after 3 days after the treatment. Then I have hive 2, is a very weak hive, and I lost it last week also. Okay, I had 7 on average, and I had 5 mites over here. So weak hive, you cannot even consider evaluating. But here you see from 5, you go in hive number 8A, you go to 79. Hive number, family number 12 has 27, so quite a bit. So you also go higher, 415, very strong hive. You have 11B, which is a strong hive, has only 70. Okay, 8B, 256 is a medium strong hive. 8E, medium strong, 47. So within that same family, this comes from the same queen, you see quite some variation. Okay, 8 here, that's the original, she has only 18. Okay, and their strength is very similar. Then this is a wild hive that somebody gave me, has 15 and went to 692. That's a lot. Okay, and then so basically try when you evaluate your mite drop, also look a little bit how strong is my hive. Do I have only 2 or 3 frames with bees, or do I have 5 or 6 frames, or maybe my whole 9 or 10 frames with bees? Okay, so a strong hive for me is 8 or more frames with bees. A very weak hive is only 1 frame, maximum 2 frames. Conclusions: enough food supplies, avoid starvation, control viral diseases by controlling the mites. Clean your equipment regularly and wash your bee suits before visiting someone and after coming back. You don't want to bring something to somebody and you don't want to bring it back either. Yeah, know your close by beekeepers and how they operate. Yeah, if you think they are not doing the right thing, yeah, try to educate them because it can affect you also. Yeah, avoid beekeeper visitors with dirty equipment and suits. Okay, again, if somebody visits you, they need to wash their equipment before, their suits and the equipment they leave at home. They use your equipment when they want to have a peek into your hives. Use entrance reducers to control robbing and drifting bees. Okay, so you do this mostly at the end of the summer when robbing becomes more prevalent. Place some artificial water spots, yeah, and use chlorine to disinfect the site regularly, or use a dripping outside faucet. Okay, and then have a good ventilated and sunny spot for the hives. And then as last, and there we started also in the first presentation, have sufficient food resources nearby for strong colonies. So you want to start with bees, yeah, check first if you have enough food sources in the area, because you don't want to be feeding your bees, yeah, all along the year. That was it. Thank you very much.
So we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll have the second presentation. In the back, there are some new catalogs that weren't there last time, the data catalogs. There's also some hints about cooking with honey and some recipes, and the rest will be door prizes. You covered a lot of it here with pest management.
He covered a lot.
Yeah. We're going to be repeating and contradicting each other a little bit.
Well, doesn't matter.
No.
Different
I think
opinions.
that's the first thing I said, wasn't it? In my little presentation.
Yeah, you do.
I did.
I think you should have.
Well, that is why I said.
Huh?
Say.
That is why I mentioned we need to flip through the slides
Yeah.
to avoid.
Yeah, but we would have taken forever.
Well, no. Don't exaggerate. Here, you can use this.
give us your email?
I'm not sure. I did or not.
I got a bunch of emails the first day, and none of them I can't read. Okay, there's gonna be a meeting on March 14th.
Okay.
And we'll talk about it at the end.
All right.
And they'll take your money there.
Exactly. Is there a Jennifer in here? Jennifer Beasley?
That's me.
That's you. I can't read your email at all.
It's okay. My husband's on there too.
Okay.
So he can.
Okay, his is T and then underline and then his
His last name, yeah.
Am I up next?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi there. Is this what I use to operate?
Yeah, that should work.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
It's all right. That's better.
And then is there a laser pointer?
Yeah,
Or something?
that right there.
Okay. Okay, that's the pointer, and then
And that's forward and back.
okay.
And that probably blacks the screen, I don't know.
Well, if I do, come rescue me, or whatever. That's all. I'm Earl Rowe, and Ed said, would you teach a couple of things for us, during this training? And I said, well, sure. And he said, what? And the last time I did tools and things, and he said, special management challenges. Or should I get like this? Okay. Special management challenges. And I thought, well, that's about whatever I want to make it to be, I don't know exactly. And I said, well, do you have a PowerPoint? He said, oh, yeah, I've got a PowerPoint on that. I said, I'm in. If I don't have to develop the PowerPoint myself, and everything. But I did add a few things to it. And basically, this is Ed's with Earl's few additions here. That top quote is something you should remember. We could do it right here with the three of us. If you ask the three of us, we'll give you six different reasons. But it says, ask 10 beekeepers a question and get 13 answers. There's usually more than one right answer. Everything that Wynn said, I agree with. You know how it is. And it comes from whether it comes from whether you're an organic beekeeper, which says you use no chemicals. You're going to go and you're going to let the bees survive and try to work with nature, or you can be somebody that uses soft chemicals, or you can be somebody that uses hard chemicals, or you can be, and what I'm saying, with almost any question in beekeeping, there's more than one right answer. All of us are fiercely combative, and we'll draw our line in the ground and then go on, because we're all in it for the bees when it comes down to it. Remember that you're a beekeeper to help the bees, not to make money. You might make some, but don't count on it. It would have been much cheaper for me to buy honey. And my wife would agree with it completely. We could have bought a lot of honey with what I spent in beekeeping, and I make almost all my equipment. I'm an ex-shop teacher, and if you know somebody who builds houses, all those scraps they pay or burn, those can make all the bee materials you want to make. But you're still going to buy frames, and you're going to buy bees. And I remember my wife was so impressed that I bought this little insect, and it's $40, or $25 in shipping, a queen, So anyhow, you can spend some money in beekeeping. Experience as a teacher. Learn from your mistakes, and better yet, learn from somebody else's. When we tell you things that we've experienced, and you say, oh, I'm not going to let that happen to me. I'll give you one great example. In nature, you take the bees are in trees, in holes, in the shade. I had a group of 4 great hives going, and I thought, oh, I'm going to take them out of the sun and put them in the shade in this nice area here, and I did. And what I found out is small hive beetles love the shade, and they killed off all 4 of those hives. They basically took it over. Before I could actually stop it, they had wiped them out. So don't put your hives in the shade. And there you've learned one lesson to get you through. We've already talked about the bees need something to eat. In today's monoculture world, if you were to take them out and put them in a field with nothing but one product out there, your bees are going to starve to death. Now, I'll let you know something. I have 54 acres. My wife and I have a farm with 54 on hundreds of acres. But somebody raising bees in town here can get more honey than we can out there, because you all water your plants all through the summer, keep all these flowering things going, and so you can get a lot more honey there. But really, you just need to put your bees where they have a chance to make a living. Of course, I shouldn't say this. Okay, I have a son who lives in Farmington, at the foot of Mount Kessler. If things get dry in the middle of the summer and around my place, we can take our bees and move them up to his place. And there's a lot of food available for them. And then when things in the winter, in the fall, when you get your fall crops coming along, we can move them back out to our place, you know, and things. But I think I'm supposed to notify the state board or whatever when I'm moving my bees, and we don't always do that. But what I'm trying to say is bees need something to eat. Bees need a good place. And if you have neighbors that spray, like farmers that spray, you need to develop a relationship with them so that they will tell you when they're going to spray so you can keep your bees from going out on days like that. Kind of the opposite of the food. You want to make sure they don't get insecticide. Never harvest honey that bees may need. When it comes a time in usually July, end of June, we harvest our honey. And you should never where you leave the bees with nothing to eat. It gets really dry, they run out, and you haven't saved yourself any money because you're going to be buying bees to replace the ones that you starved out. Same thing going into winter. Sometimes we can harvest. Traditionally here we're a one time a season harvest, but if we have a fall crops that come on, good rains, mild temperatures, we may have a fall harvest. The honey is quite a bit different. The spring harvest will be very clear, translucent. As you get into the fall harvest, it will be looking more like sorghum molasses, or a darker and a different taste. But make sure you don't steal. You got to leave. In our case, I think it's a pretty safe bet. You need to leave your bees one full deep box of honey to get through the winter. Bees eat very little during the winter months, but they can starve quickly when they start producing brood in late winter, because that ball where they get in there and they flex their wings and they heat the group to stay alive. Well, once they lay brood, they can't move. If they move away from the brood will freeze, and so they try to stay there. At the same time, if they may have honey 2 frames over, so they have a decision to make. Do we move to the honey and save ourselves, or do we stay here and try to protect the future of the hive? And what you'll find sometimes is your hive will starve out even though there's still honey in the hive, simply because maybe we had a cold snap came in where it got down to 20 degrees and they can't move. So anyhow, make sure you leave plenty of honey. Be prepared to supplement with sugar water. And one of the things I didn't know, you heard him talking about 2 in 1 and 1 in 1. The first number is what part sugar. So 2 to 1 is 2 cups of sugar to 1 cup water. And in the wintertime, you use a 2, and sometimes I use a 3 cups of sugar to 1 cup water. And I heard somebody ask 2 lessons ago about freezing up in the wintertime. If you mix that much sugar to the water, it will not freeze. It's almost like an antifreeze. Of course, the bees won't be out to eat it, but at least you don't have to worry about you freezing up in your box. You also need to provide pollen. And I read this in Langstreth's book about rye flower. He mentioned that when in the late winter, early spring, that they could actually use stone ground rye. And so I bought some the other day and put it out. And I thought, okay. And one of my hives I found out had died out, but the sugar water I had in there was still being used up, and bees were going in and out of the box. And I thought, oh, this is a wonderful hive I have going. And then when I opened it up, I found out, no, those are the bees that used to be mine that have swarmed and gone off in the woods near where my hives are, and are coming back now and eating the sugar water that I put out for the bees that I had. But I put out this rye flour, and of all the hives that I put out the rye flour on, the one that the wild bees are using, boy, they had it cleaned up in about 20 minutes. I put out a cap of about like this and about this high, and they had cleaned it up. But you understand they need the pollen so that they can raise the babies that they have now. You can't raise brood without pollen. So they're using that for their pollen source. Anyhow, you need to be ready. Like the swarm weather we just had, you can go into your hives and see where they're at. And if they've got plenty of stores, then you're in good shape. But if not, you need to be ready to supplement. Keep your equipment in good repair, and this is the time of the year. You'll find out that, okay, when you really get into beekeeping, and okay, I need a box, and I need 10 frames with foundation, and I need 2 more bases, and you don't have time to build them, or you don't have time to buy them, or you don't. Wintertime is the time that you bring in your equipment, you clean it up, you get your foundation in, if you're putting in plastic frames with beeswax on it, your beeswax during that time, you paint your equipment so that it looks good. Bees really don't want you painting it while they're living in it. You know, so it's a great time of year right now to finish up working on it, getting your stuff prepared, because it becomes kind of frantic. You get a call and somebody's got a swarm, and you better have all the stuff ready to go to hive a new hive. Bee equipment does deteriorate. It is an outside, in the weather. You'll find which types of materials work well, which ones will mold, which paints mold and which don't. Whether plywood will come apart on you. If it's not painted 4 or 5 coats, it will come pieces on you. So, this is the moth, the wax moth that comes in, and you'll see this lovely little white moth flying around, and you think, oh, that's kind of neat or whatever, and then you open up your hive and you get things that look like this, and it says they come in and they make a living out of what you've got in your hive. They love your pollen, they love the nectar, they love the comb, and they go in and they have a party. And the moth comes in and lays the eggs, which develop into larvae, which produce more moths, which comes, and it's a steady cycle. And you open up your box, and it looks like that. And you got to remember, these things are laying their eggs in your honey. So it completely fouls. Your box smells horrible. One of the people I know had this happen to their box, and I said, well, what did you do? And he goes, well, I really couldn't save anything. He said, but we have these things called solar wax melters, where you take your frames and you put them in this box with a glass lid, and the sun gets it really hot in there, and then the wax melts off and drops into a little pan underneath. And he said he sure enjoyed watching these things fry in his solar collector there. That strong hives are the best defense against insects, of predators coming into your hive. If you've got a very strong hive, they will keep your hive beetles at bay. They will keep these things at bay. Won't mean you won't have them in your hive. It's like your hive beetles. When you open your box, sometimes you'll see the hive beetles go scurrying. That's because the bees have had them cornered where they couldn't move. They couldn't go out and do anything until you opened the box. And then when you opened the box, that broke up the bees, and that allowed them to run around. They have bees that their job is just to keep this beetle or these moths or that is their job in the hive, is just to protect the hive from those insects or predators that are in there. Maintain strong, well-fed, disease-free colonies. Strong is key. Right now, I'll give you another thing when we say strong. I had some strong colonies going into winter, 2 deep boxes. Well, during the course of the winter, there's been a natural die-off. And so what I'm doing now, instead of having 2 deep boxes with 20 frames to protect, the next warm day, I will take 1 box out, leaving all the food that's still there and the brood that's there and the bees that are there. But that allows the bees that are there to have much less to defend. So there's less room for the wax moths to take over a part of the hive, or less room for the hive beetles to take over. Does that make sense? Strong hives are the best defense you have. With that, and I just did this. In fact, we're going to talk, well, at this time of year, I open up the hive, and like I said, there's been a natural die-off. I will take the 2 boxes off, take my bottom board, turn it upside down, pop it, and put it back in, and that takes all that trash. Now, if I wait till later in the year, the bees are naturally hygienic. They will try to remove every dead bee and every dead hive beetle and all the stuff on there. But by doing what I did, I just saved them a big job. I got rid of all that stuff that they don't have to. It's not in the hive anymore. And it also is a way of removing some disease-making materials from your hive. You can have there are traps, and one of the things that if anybody in here is an inventor, when I say wax moths, Varroa Mite, small hive beetles, come up with the next trick, and you can make a fortune selling it to these beekeepers that want to develop the next. And we're going to show you one invented by an Arkansan here in just a minute. Okay, storing equipment, and this is where being part of the bee club helps you. I've been raising bees, or bees have been raising me, one or the other, since about 2012 or so. Am I an expert? In no way. I learn every day, and people teach me. But when I store my equipment, if you're not careful, you put all your boxes with your foundation and stuff up, and then when you pull them out after the winter, the wax moths have been in there and had themselves a good time. So I have a way. Ed says here that you can treat them 10 days at 33 degrees, 21 days at 35 degrees. That 116, when you say carefully, you're saying that it's hard to keep it at that temperature and not go above, or?
No, it's hard not to hurt the wax.
Okay, if you go above that?
Yeah, it'll start sagging.
Okay, so it's and my wife doesn't like it, but I use a freezer for a lot of our things, and the reason she doesn't like it, when you start putting beehives and frame, all the other stuff in your freezer, it doesn't stay spotless. And so it's one of those things that I really have a freezer that I use, and then we have the other freezer, now that, and you may, of course, remember what I told you, it's cheaper to buy honey than to do all, but anyhow, a lot of times I will take, if I have an infestation, I will take all the equipment, put it in the freezer, leave it there 3, 4, 5 days, and that pretty well takes care of the insects. The Varroa or anything else that might, or the small hive beetles or the wax moths. But then I bag it up for the winter. And you see where I said chemical stacking supers with, and would you want to pronounce that? Okay. Well, I'll give you a picture of it. It looks like this. And what I do, I take a small Ziploc bag, and I've painted my box or whatever. I put my 8 or 10 frames of foundation in it, and then I take a small Ziploc bag and I put about 1 teaspoon of this in it, and Ziploc that thing to about 1 inch. Leave 1 inch open. Put it inside of a trash bag. Seal the trash bag. And that way it has this odor inside, and it'll keep the wax moths and other insects out of it until springtime. Now, about 2 or 3 or 4 days before I'm going to use those boxes, I take them out, and by the way, the chemical has dissipated. The little Ziploc bag is empty. But I'll take this out, and I'll take it and let it sit outside for 2 or 3 days and let the odor get away, because the bees don't want to be in something that smells like this either. This is part of being in the club. Ed says, make sure you tell them not to use any naphthalene. And I believe that's mothballs. Is that not correct?
Mothballs can be either one.
Okay.
Same packaging. You have to look at the active ingredient.
Okay, so look at your active ingredient and make sure that it does not say naphthalene, because naphthalene will actually get into the wax and become part of your honey. So yes, when you start using chemicals, you've got to remember you're producing a food product. You do not want to be giving your customers hard chemicals in their honey, you know, or for yourself to ingest, you know. But, so Ed would not have put this in there. This is one where, remember, you have 2 different opinions or 3 different opinions, you know, and at the same time, I had the beekeeper, and this is what he said to do, you know. So here you go get your book and you think so. But this is what I do when I'm storing my equipment for the winter. I seal it up, and then come springtime, I open it up and air it out for a couple of days. Oh, there we go. Ants. I don't like seeing ants in my boxes. If you've got concrete blocks that you're setting your boxes on, is there anything to keep the ants out? You all have been to a picnic or whatever, they're going to show up, you know, and then how do you get them out of your bee boxes? They coexist with the bees pretty well. I try to do things to keep them from entering. I don't have my hives on blocks. I have them up on 4 legs on a little bench, and each of the 4 legs I have in like a 3-pound coffee can, and you put oil inside of that, and then the ants can't come up and go up the legs. That's a way. Now, that goes to another thing I'm going to talk about here in a second. That works until you have not cut your grass and weeds, and then as it grows up, it touches the side of your bench, and the ants have a natural way around those cans. But anyhow, they can irritate the bees, damage the equipment. You can keep your apiary clean. You can raise your hives an oil bath, feed on stands, red pepper sprinkles. And also I did something else. This is called the standard cover, and it's covered with metal, and it comes down around, and it's migratory cover, which is just a board with boards on the end of it. I have gone to the migratory covers. Now, when you're talking to beekeepers, there'll be half of them that say, "Oh, you've got to go." It's another one of those where you have a disagreement. The reason being, with this type of cover, the one over here, that allows small hive beetles, ants, any other type of insect can get into any crack you have. They can go right up underneath the metal in here, and really no way for me to get to them. With the migratory, the bees take care of them themselves. There's no place for the insect to go. Does that make sense? I'm simply trying to prevent any place for the insects to go. This is just a board and a board and a board and a board and a board. And the board lays right on top of your hive. And there's no inner cover. If you remember, I talked about inner cover a couple weeks ago. There's no inner cover on the inside of that. So there's really no place for it to go. Commercial beekeepers, this is all they use. When I talked about screen bottom boards, commercial beekeepers don't use those either. They have a solid bottom board. And the idea behind the commercial beekeeper is there's no place for insects to go that the bees can't get to them. Also, you can't use these to move hundreds of beehives at a time. You can stack. These are the ones that you see on the semi-trailer trucks where there are hundreds of them on the back of them, because you can just stack them one on top of another, but band them down. The reason I use a migratory cover is simply to limit ants and hive beetles, places for them to go. I ran into my first mouse in my hive when I cleaned out just the other day. I came down and found exactly that, a big hole in one of my frames where it had crawled up in there and had eaten all my foundation out and brought up some material from underneath the hive and made a little nest right in there. And you got to think about it. It's pretty wonderful if you're a mouse. I mean, it's a great place. It's kind of like I think about, mice in a feed store. you know, it's heaven, you know, and everything. Well, in this case too, because the bees are heating this place, but you know, warm enough for the moths to survive, but it's better than being outside, you know, or whatever. And it's got all the honey and other things that probably can eat some brood or other than that. But and the way you can prevent them, it doesn't show it here very well. You can do it what's called an entrance reducer, and it's a piece of metal that goes across it that has openings big enough for the bees to go through, but not big enough for a mouse to go through. And you put those on in the fall, right before you know you're setting up for the fall and shutting down for the year. Make sure there's not a mouse already inside when you put them on, but that will stop mice from going in. And for the biggest part of the year that we're coming into, you're going to be in and out of your hives, or you should be in and out of your hives on a regular basis, and mice really aren't a problem. But the way you could stop them is an entrance reducers there, or the metal things that go across there. They do a lot of damage. I can verify that. I've got several frames that I'm going to have to replace the foundation and decide whether I want to even keep those frames in there. Mice go to the bathroom, so that's another organism that's been added to the hive that I've got to consider. My hive was off the ground, but the entrance reducer is the way to stop it. If you go out to your hive, which is normally this mild-mannered, and my wife likes to work without her gloves in the hive, you know, that she's got, and well, you may one day find out that your bees, instead of being mild-mannered, are really irritable. And what you'll notice is that some skunks have been there all night scratching, trying to get into it or whatever, and that causes them to be irritated. So raising them up off the ground is a big one. Y'all know what carpet strips are? That's those little boards with the nails sticking up. If you're having a problem like that, they're pretty effective. You know, as far as, in other words, you're going to try to make things uncomfortable if skunks are making a regular habit of being around your hives. And I've had problems with skunks before, and you know, they have a natural weapon that makes them hard to deal with. You know, and that is a problem here. I remember last year in the spring, late winter going into spring, they sighted a bear between Prairie Grove and Lincoln last year. Well, guess where I live? You know, and it just takes one bear, you know, going through, and I've got hives scattered around the farm, you know, and they would. And if you live in Madison County, which we've got a cabin over by Kingston, I can't really have bees over there unless I'm ready to go full bore, electric fences, like, you know, type to, and this is what you'll find if bears get into your hive. And it won't be one hive, it will be however many hives you have out there will be scattered all across, and all of your equipment is busted all the heck, you know, where they go in. And where it says choosing locations, I feel pretty comfortable where I'm at. There's not many bears. If they do, they trap them and move them on, you know, type thing over in downtown. Is there a bear every year around Fayetteville? Every year in the news, I see, you know, oh, we found one up in a tree.
Right down the greenway.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's what happens, of course, is the mama kicks the young boar free, and he's got to find some new territory because the old boars will kill him if he goes where they're at, you know. So, and towns have all this trash, you know, that they can make a living off of real easy. But anyhow, you got to choose your location. You try not to leave a lot of stuff out there, and this is what we do over at the cabin. We never take any food product outside. We never leave anything around the cabin that smells of food because we don't want them entering the cabin while we're gone, type thing. Electric fences are the way to go. there was a member of the bee club, and I hope he's still a member of the bee club, that does have bees in Madison County. And he described to me what he does. He has electric fence. It's not like this one. Y'all know what cattle panels are? He has cattle panels up on wood, 4x4s, insulated, on the insulators. And he's got the highest voltage fencer that you can buy. And he regularly waters around the base of his fence, so you can get a good ground. And then you also do something, you attach stuff to the fence for the bear to come up and smell, so that it touches his nose to the fence when he comes up there to smell it. And it rocks him, and everything. But that's bears and bees. Unless you're going to invest in some type of secure electric fence type thing, you're not going to survive with bears. Grass and weeds under the hives. You can use recycled carpet. You can always find somebody that's just pulled out their old yucky carpet. Lay it underneath your hive. Win, in your honor, Win, I put old swimming pool liners, because that's what he showed he has underneath his. Tar paper roofing felt, old tarps. You should put something underneath your hive to keep all that grass and weeds from growing up. Number one, that provides a path for insects to get into your hive. Number two, it can actually go up and kind of hinder the bees flying in and out of their hive. If you're not, it'll be 3, 4, 5 feet high, higher than your entrances, so they have to come in over the weeds and down to come into your hive. So you should do this, and you should do this when? When should you put out that roofing felt or something where your hive is going to be? Right now is a good time, before you've got anything growing. And I think I described it last time I talked to you. I have gone out and weed eated, and bees don't like you weed eating around their hive. It's one of those that, actually, they really don't like you getting too close with the lawnmower either. And I can tell you that bees can outrun a lawnmower. When they're riding lawnmowers, you will be off and running. You won't be staying on it. Small hive beetle. This is the bane of beekeepers right now, or one of the banes. And this is the Freeman beetle trap. You remember I told you that you need to come up with new ideas? Mr. Freeman, who is from Arkansas, just passed away, came up. This is just basically a screened-in bottom board. Can you see the screen? You have a tray that you slide in. In this tray, you can put either mineral oil or vegetable oil. The advantage of mineral oil is that in the summertime, it takes longer to get to smelling real bad. Vegetable oil on those 100-degree days after a week or two out there with stuff falling in and fermenting into it. And you put some apple cider vinegar in there. You give it where it's just a nice level bottom of there. And what happens is the hive beetles will smell that cider and come down and drop in. And as soon as they drop in, it's got the oil, they drowned. So it's pretty effective. I'm proud of him for inventing it. I think it's probably the most effective way. And the other thing about this is, do you remember the sticky board that Wim was talking about? That slides in the same slot. So instead of, if you want to check for Varroa Mite, you pull this out, you slide your sticky board in. And do you all know what a sticky board is? You know those campaign signs, those plastic campaign signs? Cut to this dimension, and then you take some Vaseline and you just rub on top of it. And that way, when stuff falls through, it sticks to this. And after you count it, you just clean it off, and it's ready to go again for your next one. Does that make sense? Also, in the wintertime, if you think it's too cold, instead of leaving your screen open like this, you can just slide your sticky board underneath there, and you've created a windbreak. Okay, I didn't know, this is kind of a beginner class, so I want to make sure, all the stuff that used to really puzzle me, I wanted to make sure I try to catch you on it. Now, they have invented some other things. Beetle Blaster, or Beetle
Blaster.
This is a little thing, and it sits in between your frames. It comes down and sits absolutely flush on your frames, and you have either vegetable oil or apple cider vinegar again, or diatomaceous earth. Now, diatomaceous earth is bad for your bees, but inside your bees aren't going to be inside of here. And you put it on top of the frame, and the bees chase the beetles. Remember I told you how they'll pin them in the area? Well, the beetles will run across that and drop into it, thinking, oh, I found my safe spot. And they drop in and they drown in the oil. Okay. And this is a beetle jail, I think they call it. And there is some kind of chemical that you put in the center of it.
You can make it.
Or you can make, and again, you see where the beetle can run to the side and get caught in there and can't get back out. Or Swiffer sheets, like the Swiffer mop. You can ball them up and put them on the top of your frames. Unfortunately, bees get their legs caught in them too, but it seems to be about 5 times the hive beetles to the bee that get caught in there. So these are all different things you can use to work on hive beetles. And I probably just touched on this much of it, but this one is really, it's multi-purpose. You gotta have a base for your hive anyhow. I have screen bases on all my hives. I think the part where things can fall out of the hive. If you have a Varroa Mite and you don't have a screened bottom, it falls off a bee, falls to the bottom of the hive, the next bee that comes through gets on and comes back up. If you got a screen, it just falls all the way through the ground and will never make it all the way back up. Now, I was thinking, you all are supposed to be beginners or whatever for the most part, right? And they keep telling you you're going to go through your hive. And they say, and you need to be looking for this and you need to be looking for that. And you say, when they say uncapped brood, this is what you're looking for. You see the little worm in the bottom of it there? Uncapped brood. You know what else this means if you see uncapped brood? It means you had a queen 3 days ago. Because after 3 days, it becomes cap brood. And can you all tell me what this is? These colors.
Pollen?
Yeah, it's pollen. And you'll always, they'll have the pollen close to the brood because they have to have the pollen to feed the young bees. So mix it and nectar or honey together to make something we call bee bread or whatever, and that's what they feed. These are fed royal jelly for the first 3 days, and then first 3 days? And then they're fed bee bread.
It's 2 days as a larva, 3 days as an egg. So it's 5 days.
Okay, so 5 days they're fed. And by the way, I don't know if you've seen when they're first laid, when the egg is first laid down there, it is little. A grain of rice is gigantic compared to what these things start out as. After they're capped, they can't make a queen out of it. When they're in this stage, if the queen dies and they still have some of these around, they can make a queen. The younger the better. These are really getting too old to make a good queen out of. You want one of those that are little bitty, 1 day old if they can. But I wanted you all to kind of see. Oh, these things here, and this is a terrible picture, I know. You see where this is kind of flat, just a little top to it, tan colored? These are your worker bees. These are the females coming along. But if you look at something and it looks like this, where all your brood has this big cap on top of it, that's drone brood. That's the boys. If you open your hive and it looks like this, you might start thinking, I might be in trouble. Now, I have frames where the queen will come in and we kind of mentioned it. A Varroa control method is to have a frame of bigger than normal cell size, and the queen will lay, and by the way, the queen can pick when she lays, she can lay a boy egg or a girl egg. And she sees that frame full of the bigger cells, and she lays all boys. Well, Varroa Mite would much rather be in a boy cell than a girl cell because they get another couple of days of growing in there. So one of the ways of controlling Varroa is you have a frame of that bigger cells, like this. You have a whole frame, two sides, and when it gets about this size before they hatch out, you shake all the bees off of it and go put it in the freezer. Do you need the boys in any way, shape, or form in your hive? What work do boys perform?
Mating.
Mating is it. So it's a form of Varroa control. But I wanted you to know, if you open up your hive and you see something that looks like that, that's your drone cells, the boys. And I only did this. This is another horrible picture, but it kind of shows you open brood. Those are the ones, the little ones, uncapped. You got your pollen, you got your honey. This is how when you open up your hive, in the middle of it. And by the way, when you open up your hive, the frames you should take out will either be, it's usually the second one from one end or the other. The reason being, in the middle are the bulk of your bees. That's where all this brood rearing is going on. That's where all this activity. When you pull out a hive, when they're all packed in there together, you've got a pretty good chance of rolling and killing a few bees. Does that make sense? They're glued together. You're prying, you're pulling and all that. So you want to go out to the outside edge where there's fewer bees and pull them apart, and then start sliding them over so you're not squishing, because you don't want to roll up and kill your queen. You all understand there's only one bee that's really important in the hive. If she's gone, your hive is in trouble. So that's why you work on that. But on those inner 4 or 5 frames, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see open brood surrounded by pollen and nectar, and then the sealed brood outside of that. I'm just doing it because I think you're wondering what you're going to see when you open up your box, and that's really what you're looking for. I think I'm done.
Okay, we'll take another 15-minute break. I've got some little pamphlets here for those of you that are actually going to become beekeepers. I know today so far has been kind of hard because we've talked about a lot of problems. And in the next section, I'm going to try to pull it together and make those problems easier to understand and easier to control. Anybody that wants one of these, take them. They're free. They're from the Extension Service. John Swishlock is the apiary specialist now for the state, and he got a grant to make these, and they're very good. You can also get them online, and just go to the U of A Extension Service and look up the apiary section, and you can find these. But if you want one, they're up here. Don't forget to take some of those catalogs, otherwise I've got to carry them home. So we'll start again in just a few minutes. Oh, after I'm done, we're going to have another question and answer. I know that there's a few people that came in late. You might not have gotten the little door prize tickets. They're up there. Make sure that you put half of it in the thing and keep half of it. Okay, we're going to get started again. I want to sort of pull all this together, and I want to end on a more optimistic tone because I know that diseases and parasites, all the different maladies that bees can have is sort of depressing. I'm going to touch on that a bit, but I'm going to also tell you ways that you can overcome them. And they don't always have to have chemicals. Our bees are under attack. You saw some of these pictures. There's viruses and bacterias and yeasts and fungus, tracheal mites, Varroa mites, small hive beetle and other insects. And then there's the pollutants that are out there that we use and breathe. We shouldn't be using them. Every time you buy chemicals, by the way, they're just going to make more. So the fewer you buy, the fewer they'll make. All that adds up to problems for the bees. So how many of you, just in case you might be exposed to a bacteria? Nobody. I mean, it's very rare. Sometimes we get them when we don't mean to get them because they're in soaps, they're in meats, they're in other things that we're eating that have been treated. But generally, using antibiotics prophylactically, just in case, is going to cause other problems, cause super bacterias that they have problems with in hospitals and stuff. Most of you do other things to stay healthy and help your body fight off diseases. We have genetics, and our bodies have some defenses, but mostly we try to stay fit by eating well and sleeping well and minimizing stress and good hygiene. And there's vaccines sometimes that need to be used when there's an epidemic, for example. Have we ever had an epidemic? Some use supplements. I use some supplements to have better resistance for things. When you think about a broken bone, you don't take off the cast right away, but you do eventually. The cast is to set the bone. But if you leave the cast on for a long period of time, the bone will never get strong. And so we have to be exposed to things in order to get resistance to them. So Wynn earlier said that everybody's got mites, and I believe so. I mean, I've been places that didn't have mites that they hadn't gotten yet. I actually had mites in my hives long before they got to this country because I was keeping bees in France. The mites actually came from bees that were transshipped from Ukraine, this is interesting politics right now, through Russia on trains to the far east of Russia where they crossed with, they were next to Apis cerana, the Asian bee, and the mite jumped from the Asian bee onto the Western bee, and then some of those bees were shipped back to Ukraine. And then they spread to Europe and spread around the world. It's a shame that that happened, but what happened next was some researchers from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, went to the far east of Russia and found some surviving colonies there. And those colonies were sort of like bones that learned to have some resistance. Bones that didn't keep a cast on forever. A body that's exposed to foreign parasites, a foreign parasite for the first time, for example, malaria, will do one of three things. It will die from it, it will learn to live with it, or it will build up a resistance to it. That's just what happens in nature. That happens all the time. Nature finds a balance. But a body that's always artificially defended from foreign parasites will never have a resistance to it. So the more we use chemicals over and over and over again, the more we fight the mites for the bees, or whatever disease we're talking about, the less apt the bees are to be resistant, to either learn to live with them or learn to not live with them. Nature will usually find a balance. When a new pathogen is introduced to a host, it can be devastating. I travel, Wynn and I both travel all over the world. I do it with beekeeping. I have been to over 130 countries working with beekeepers. When I go places, I'm exposed to things that I haven't been exposed to, so I need to be a little bit careful. I also need to be careful because I might be carrying something that they're not exposed to. A lot of places their water isn't bad, but it's got minerals and stuff in it that I'm not used to, so it can make me sick. And if they came here, our water could make them sick. So when a new pathogen is introduced, for example, like the blankets that the Pilgrims gave to the Native Americans, they got a disease and wiped out a lot of them because they weren't used to that disease. But then the surviving host, if some of them survive, the surviving host can build a resistance, which can often be passed on through their offspring, unless we don't allow it, unless we keep artificially killing the problem or trying to fight the problem like Varroa mites. Tracheal mites is a good example. There's very, very little problem with tracheal mites anymore. We rarely see it. The reason being, people didn't treat for a long time. The treatment was a little bit hard, especially in Arkansas, because it was temperature sensitive and stuff, and we don't have steady temperatures here. But people can't see the tracheal mite. The tracheal mite is tiny, 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 microscopic, and it's inside the trachea of the honeybee. And so people didn't see it, so they didn't treat for it. And the fact that they didn't treat for it, the bees became resistant. Bees gain their own resistance. I'm not saying that there's not a place for chemical controls. When things get out of control, something has to be done, or the bees will die. You do it for your dog or your cat or your child, doesn't matter. You're going to do whatever you need to do. For me and my bees, I only use chemicals when nothing else will do the job. There are many other ways to control diseases and pests that won't weaken the bees and will help them to learn to take care of themselves. We all have to make choices. I've said this before. I think Earl said it a little while ago. We have to make choices. We're going to make different choices. But we make choices based on the perceived outcomes or consequences. This is my favorite picture about making choices. That was in Bangkok. I was in a boat that this lady wanted me to buy a drink from her. I had to choose. Not buy a drink, buy a Coke, buy a beer. I bought the Coke. But we have to make choices all the time. Beekeeping's full of choices: to check your bees, to make splits, to move them, to feed them, to replace comb, to replace queens, to move frames, how much honey to take, on and on and on. When you go into a hive, you're going to find that you're always making decisions. You're not always aware of the choices that you're making, but you made a choice when you walked in the building. Did you turn right? Did you turn left? Did you come in here? Whatever you did, you made a choice. There's other ways that we can deal with ailments. Do we treat for them regularly? Do we measure and treat by thresholds, which I'll explain, and Wynn touched on it a bit? Do we take risks? Do we plan for long-term survival, or will we just worry about now? Assessing treatment options, we've got choices to make. We can either treat or not treat. Now, under not treat, I put 007. And that's James Bond. James Bond. The reason I put that there is because one of his movies was Live and Let Die. So that's sort of what not treating is doing, is just saying, okay, you're going to either make it or not make it. That's pretty drastic, and that's the end of choices on that run. There's an advantage to that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the other side says treat, and there's different ways we can treat. We can use hard chemicals, which are the miticides. They're a pesticide designed in talking about Varroa mites, because that is the major problem. It's the hard chemicals for Varroa mites are called miticides, and there's a few of them, and I'll talk about them. There's soft chemicals or organic chemicals, but they're still chemicals. whether they're natural or not. There's cultural and mechanical or genetic ways of treating. Mechanical is like if you have a mosquito and you slap it. That's a mechanical control for that mosquito. If you have a lot of mosquitoes, you might have to do something more. If you have a house full of mosquitoes, you might have to tent your house and get it fumigated. Those are choices. And then lastly, integrated pest management, which is really using all of them. Now, a lot of people, when they think of integrated pest management, they think that it means you're moving from chemicals to not chemicals, and that's not the case. Integrated pest management means that you choose the least invasive way to treat for the current situation. So the whys and whats of integrated pest management, the specifics. By definition, in agriculture, integrated pest management is a pest control strategy that uses an array of complementary methods, mechanical or physical devices, genetic, biological, or cultural management, and chemical management. So it's using everything, but it's not using everything just helter-skelter. The Penn State University made this graph. It looks a little bit like the food chart. And if you look at it, as you go from the base, which is a cultural control, which would include hygienic or mite-resistant genetics, that's the way we should all be heading. That's preventative, and it's the least intervention. The higher you go up here is more toxicity. At the top you have the miticides, then you have the other chemicals that are available, then you have biological methods, and I'll talk about some of those, and I'll talk more about the physical and mechanical methods of treating for Varroa Mites, small hive beetles, other diseases like the viruses and the moths and the brood diseases, the Falbroods, on and on. But we need to always try to do the least invasive, the least toxic method. So it's sort of thinking not in the box, but out of the box. In the box thinking is a three-step breakdance that's been going on for a long time in beekeeping. People have a problem, or maybe they don't have a problem, but they think they have a problem. They don't really know what it is or how bad it is. They hit it with the chemical that's popular right now. And the popularity of chemicals has moved all around, moved back and moved forward and come back around again. Then they repeat it by the calendar. And I taught that for a long time because we only had one control for Varroa Mite for 15 years. We used to treat Falbrood prophylactically, giving the bees antibiotics on an ongoing basis. I did that. I haven't given any chemicals to my bees for 22 years now. Thinking out of the box is a different dance. It's a four-step dance. Measure the infestation level, choose the appropriate tools and controls, employ the appropriate control at threshold levels, and remeasure to see if it was effective. If it wasn't effective, you might need to move up the chart a little ways or find a different tool that will do what didn't work last time. If it was effective, you're better off. So you can tell beekeepers about things like this, but you can't make a horse drink. And I found that out the hard way working with a lot of beekeepers in Arkansas for a long time. Reasons to change the dance: sustainability of both the bees and the controls. And I'll explain why the controls aren't sustainable sometimes. Ecological, it's just cleaner to use the less invasive tools. Financial, the miticides are not cheap. And it just makes sense. Overuse of chemicals have caused confusion with the pheromones. We talked about that the first day. Bees communicate with pheromones. You put foreign objects in the hive, they lose all their communication. It's like all of a sudden, you know, a jet flies through this room when I'm trying to talk to you. You won't be able to hear me. Sublethal doses for queens, drones, and workers. Sublethal means, okay, it didn't kill them, but it sure messed them up. Some of the miticides will make the queens infertile. Some of the miticides will make the drones infertile. All of them shorten the bees' lives. Residues. Residues, I told you last week that the wax is a lipid, it's a fatty tissue, it absorbs chemicals. When you put a chemical in a hive, it's being absorbed into the wax, and therefore the mites are being exposed to that chemical at very low doses for a long period of time. And they gain resistance. They become like a super bacteria. And their babies will gain resistance. So when we first got the first chemical to use with bees that was approved by the EPA, it was called Apistan. It's still available, and it can work in some situations if need be. When we first got it, it was 98% effective. That meant if you had 100 mites in the hive, 2 survived it. You killed 98% of them. That's pretty good. But those 2 are going to have babies that are also resistant to it. And so that 2 becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16, and so forth. And before long, we had a lot of mites that were resistant to Apistan. So the chemical company said, oh, we got to come up with another one. So they came up with another one called Checkmite Plus. Its active ingredient is coumaphos. It has a different mode of action, but for reasons that I don't understand that are over my head, and I went to a lecture about it that a chemist did, when a mite becomes resistant to one mode of action, it's resistant to the other mode of action comes faster. So before long, we had resistance to that. So they came up with another one. It's called Amitraz. Comes in different forms. That was, mites were resistant to that. A lot of them were resistant to that before it was even legal. Now it's still being used, and it's still having some effect, but it's not having much effect. And all the time that people are giving treating the mites with these chemicals, the bees aren't trying to learn how to deal with them. So it's teaching the bees not to deal with them. So you get resistance of the target problem. This is a picture that I got years ago. It was in Mississippi, a large beekeeper. He burnt over $1 million worth of equipment because it was saturated with chemicals. A lot of the beekeepers back in the day, and I don't know if they're doing it anymore because I'm not in the business of controlling it anymore, were using the chemicals in a form that was liquid with emulsifiers, so it absorbed into the wood. It was a lot cheaper than buying the product that was made to be used in beehives. He ended up burning over $1 million worth of equipment because he realized he had just saturated all of his equipment with chemicals. The concept of integrated pest management is to stretch out the time in between using those heavy hitters. So we used to tell people, you know, you need to treat with whatever chemical was popular at the time in the spring and in the fall, before the honey flow and after the honey flow. And so it was treating by the calendar. But then we started realizing that it was becoming less and less effective, chemical all the time. Let's alternate between 2 chemicals. Well, that became less effective too. So then we decided that we need to come up with something different to stretch out the time in between using any chemicals. So that was sort of the beginning of looking at other possibilities. So we use various tools to keep the infestation levels at a tolerable level. In other words, below threshold. This keeps the more invasive tools effective for when they're needed. It minimizes their adverse effects, and the chemicals that are the heavy hitters should be, and therefore the chemicals that are the heavy hitters should be used only when needed, cautiously and appropriately, and not by the calendar. So we were teaching it wrong, and people learned it wrong. So the next step, the new step, dance step, is integrated pest management. Understanding the problems, having a shop full of tools, not just 1 or 2 or 3 tools, and using them cautiously and appropriately. There's lots of ways to, I hate the expression skinning a cat, I like cats. Some are expensive, some are labor intensive, some are easy, some are cheap. You can use chemicals, you can use high-tech solutions, you can use low-tech solutions. They're not all difficult. And this is just a little graphic of different ways to control a lawn. Using a chemical first, using a bush hog, using a lawnmower. This is the inspector from North Carolina showing me how he uses a scythe. And this is my neighbor when I lived in Stone County. He was using a mule to control the lawn and fertilizing it at the same time. So there's lots of different ways to do things. We can't just do things using one tool. If I need to put in a nail, I'm not going to use a grinder. If I have a problem with mites, I want to know how bad the problem is in order to decide what tool that I have in my toolbox that would be best to use. So what tools are there? We learned the whole control thing backwards. First, we learned about chemicals, and I'm glad that there were chemicals in the beginning, because if we didn't have the chemicals when the mite first got there, it would be like the blankets that were given to the Native Americans. It's a short-term solution, it's expensive, but sometimes it's necessary. But many of them leave residues and add to resistance and hurt the host and contaminate the wax and the honey. Next, we learned about measuring. We learned to measure how bad the infestation was. Then we learned about alternative controls, biological and mechanical controls. Some of them can be labor intensive, some of them aren't. Then we learned about genetics. And actually we should have learned that a long time ago. There was a man named Brother Adam, when they first had the Tracheal Mite, which came from the Isle of Wight off the coast of England, that bred bees to be resistant to the Tracheal Mite. They were called the buckfast bees. It was a long-term solution and it worked. It was slow. It's very slow to do the genetics, and labor intensive, but it's the long-term solution. IPM for American Falbrood, inspect for it often, always watch for it. There isn't very much of it around anymore, but it's still there. If you find it, everything needs to be burned. And in Arkansas, the law is that not only do you have to burn the frames and the wax and the honey and the bees, but you have to burn them in a hole so that when the fire goes out, there isn't residue on the outside that other bees are going to come and pick up. It's a very difficult spore to kill. And as Wynn said, it lasts over 60 years waiting for its next host. Change the brood comb often. That's, I can tell you stories. I was in Scandinavia when they outlawed using antibiotics in beehives. And they started changing their comb every year, all their comb every year. And they ended up having less foul brood than they had when they were using antibiotics. Careful in mixing your equipment. I think Wynn talked about that, or Earl, I'm not sure, but that we move frames from hive to hive sometimes. Always be watching for foul brood because you don't want to be spreading it. Clean up well, that was spoken about. This is what a cell looks like if you cut it the long way, after it's been in the hive for a long time. And you can see every time the larva goes to a pupa, it's spinning a cocoon. sort of inside there. And part of that cocoon stays in there, and the cell gets thicker and thicker and thicker and becomes a great medium for bacterias and other maladies to be hiding. So changing the comb, most books will tell you to change your comb out every 3rd year. So rotate every 3 years, every year you do 1/3 of your comb. I started doing mine every 2 years, and my bees seemed happier. Burn if you have Falbrood. This is what the Tracheal Mite looks like. A trachea is slightly bigger than a human hair, and I've seen as many as 15 Tracheal Mites in one trachea. The bee wasn't breathing anymore. We got the resistant bees. We learned that Crisco patties would work with them, but then Crisco patties became a medium for the small hive beetle to reproduce in. So that didn't work anymore. But people stopped treating for the Tracheal Mite because they couldn't see it. And we got resistance. Nocema, there's 2 different Nocemas. The one that Wynn was talking about is called Nocema apis, but it's been pretty much replaced with Nocema ceranae. There's a product that came from Croatia called Nosavit. I don't think that it's proven to be really effective. The Fumidil B, which is the antibiotic that you can use with it, works good for Nocema apis, but doesn't work the same for Nocema ceranae. Keeping your colonies strong is the best thing you can do. Nocema ceranae doesn't stay in the intestines of the bee. It's moved, they've even found it in the brain, so it's past that barrier. I had a big conversation with people about thresholds for Nocema, and it was all over the board, and probably the Nocema czar, if you will, from Sweden, was probably the best idea. He said, change your comb. Just keep changing your comb, and you don't have to treat for it. Here's another picture of a mite on a pupa, and like Wynn said, it's like a big fist on us. So it's pretty devastating. It will kill brood in the cell, but most of them survive, but a lot of them get viruses like the deformed wing virus. First thing we need to do is we need to be able to identify what the problem is. So there's Thack trying to tell us, or there's his Thack's friend trying to tell him that there's something, but he can't think of it fast enough to save him. So, you know, there was a lot of confusion about treating for tracheal mites and treating for Varroa mites and stuff, but now we know that Varroa mites are the big problem. Tracheal mites are not a big problem, and we need to control them. But it would be best if the bees controlled them, so we need to keep that in mind. Here's a little different graphic showing workers. This is worker development, and this is drone development. A worker develops in 21 days. In the 21 days, the mites are moving in around the 8th day, before the cell's closed on the 9th day. The mite lays its first egg around in here is a male. And then 30 hours later, and then 30 hours later. When the bee comes out, only 1 to 1.5 mature bred mites come out with that bee. So the increase in worker drone is very slow. But in drones, you get 3 to 3.5 mature pregnant mites that come out that will go into another cell and do it again. Their generations are very fast, so they have a lot of generations, and the mites way prefer to go into the workers, the drones. I actually took some mites and put them in a worker cell with a worker, and they crawled back out. Then I took a drone larva, stuffed it into a worker cell, and the mites went into it. So it didn't have anything to do with the size of the cell. It had to do with the pheromones of the male versus the female. The mites could tell. They will go to drones every time when they have a choice. which gives us a tool to control them that I'll talk about. Some general concepts. Depending on the season, 20% of the mites are exposed or walking around. Actually, they're on adult bees, sort of like taxis, walking around looking for another place to go in to breed again or to have babies. So they're on adults and not breeding, 20%. 80% of the mites are in the brood at any given time during the season. Mites prefer drone brood over worker brood. It gives them more mature mites coming out. Varroa mites have consequences. The direct consequences are that they weaken and kill brood. Secondly, they weaken and shorten the lives of adults. And then they vector a lot of viruses. Indirect problems are stresses on the colony, vectoring pathogens, creating an autoimmune deficiency. So not only are they vectoring the viruses, but they're causing the bees to not be able to defend themselves against a whole bunch of things. So we have to keep the mites under control. For Varroa, there's two levels of chemical control. One that leads to resistance and residue. Those should be safe when they're really, really necessary, sort of like a tuxedo. The other one is simpler, and it doesn't lead to resistance or residue. These can be used when genetic and mechanical methods are not keeping up. So while we try to get to the long-term solution, we have other tools that we can be using that aren't as invasive as the heavy chemicals. For Varroa mites, we have the genetics. The Russian bees have one way of controlling them. They actually bite the mites. The Varroa sensitive hygienics, which used to be called SMR, but now it's VSH, I'll give you a graphic about that. The Minnesota hygienic has sort of a combination of the two. Those are three of the mites that have been developed by researchers, or the bees that have been developed by researchers that can take care of themselves to some extent. They won't get rid of all the mites, but they'll keep it down to a level that won't hurt the colony. Mechanical, we have drone trapping, which I'll explain. Screen bottom boards was talked about a couple times, and I'll show you pictures of that. Smaller combs, there's been some people that thought that that would work. It's been disproven by researchers. Powdered sugar, it's a debate. Some people say it works, some people don't. I've seen it work. Brood breaks, which means stopping the queen from laying for a while, will stop the mites from breeding for a while, and that cuts them way back. Because mites don't live a long time, they just keep breeding and breeding. And then there's others that are being developed and being worked on. Some of them are questionable. Measuring is extremely important. There's two ways really to measure. There's a third way that we can tell whether we have mites or not, or we can tell that we have mites, we can't tell that we don't. The sugar shake, Wynn talked about that a little bit. I have a couple things that I brought. Basically, what I've used, and I'll show you pictures of it, is a jar with a screen on the top. It's an 8 mesh screen, which means there's 8 squares to the inch. You gather some bees in it. You put some sugar in there with it, and then you shake them for a little while, and then you dump it upside down. We used to do it on a white surface, but we found out in a funny way that if you do it into a white bowl with water in it, the powdered sugar that falls will dissipate and fall down to the bottom, and the mites will float. So we can see them very easily and count them very easily. A friend of mine up in Canada developed this, where you put 2 jars together. So you have sugar or alcohol in here, or soapy water works too. Soapy water and alcohol will kill the bees, but then you can dump it over and see the mites in the bottom. The bees are still stuck up here. Another friend of mine created this. This is a product that's on the market. It's called Varroa Easy Check, and it's basically the same thing. It's just a place to put the bees wash them, put them in alcohol, and then you can see the mites at the bottom. So those are the tools for sugar shake. The sticky board has been talked about. This is one that was developed by Penn State University. This is just a board that's already sticky. This one has a screen on it because they gave me a bunch of these when I was doing some work for USDA. And it was before we had screen bottom boards, so you could slide this into the hive and the bees wouldn't get stuck on it, but the mites would. The reason it's black and white is some statistician figured out that if they did this in a random pattern, they only needed to count what was on the white, and then they could divide by 3 or multiply by 3 to get how many would have been all together. So it's just saving Wynn's wife a bunch of counting. The chemicals, the first one I told you is Apistan. Its active ingredient is called fluvalinate. Checkmite Plus was the next one. Apivar is fairly new in a way. It's Amitraz, but Amitraz was around for a long time before they came up with Apivar. These are all commercially available. They're in the catalogs back there. The ones that are, the next ones are the softer chemicals. The Mite Away Quick Strip, or MAQS, is a formic acid that's already prepackaged. Formic acid in its bulk form is very dangerous to people and to everything. It's not flammable, it's explosive. So, and it won't give you cancer, but it will ruin your lungs. It won't blind you if you get the fumes, but you won't be able to see very well. So it's very dangerous. There was a lady in California that spilled a little bit on her arm, and the next day she was urinating blood. It's an organic acid, so it goes right through you. Apolife Var is also is made with thymol, which is the extract of the plant thyme. It's very strong in that. It was made by a guy in South Carolina, I believe. It's just the little pieces of frog like you use in a florist, saturated with this stuff. Apigard is a cream-like substance that has thymol in it, and it can be in a little tray that you put at the top of the hive. You have to build a little rim around the top to have room for it under your lid. But it's also thymol. It's made from thyme. The formic acids and the organic acids, those are acids. You have to be careful with them. You should use them either prepackaged or use very good protective equipment, including respirators. They're very dangerous, and especially fumigating with them. But using them in the bulk sense is also dangerous. There was a paper published it was 3 weeks ago, from the University of Georgia in Athens and from Auburn University that pretty much proved and has been published, peer-reviewed and published, that oxalic acid is not very effective. And that surprised me because they've been using the two acids for a long time in Europe. Measurement is the most important thing. How big is your mite infestation? Those are some scales I got in Russia. And that isn't really a mite. Know what the problem is and measure the level of infestation. This is a study that was done at the University of Florida by Jamie Ellis. And this is old, it's 2006. Anytime researchers are doing a study, they have to have a control group. So they had a bunch of hives that had mites that they didn't treat. Then they had some that they treated with Coumaphos, which was the chemical of the day. And then they had some that they did what they considered was integrated pest management. The honey production was highest in the integrated pest management, and I'll tell you what that was at the time. The Coumaphos was next highest, but was less than half of what the integrated pest management was, and the control was a lot less. The integrated pest management was Russian queens and a screen bottom board. Now the Russian queens, that took a while to get because they had to be studied and all that, but we have them now. They're available. Some of them are a little bit nasty. The ones that I've had that I used to get out of Baton Rouge were like puppy dogs, pussy cats, I don't know what. I worked in shorts, and I don't suggest you to do this as beginning beekeepers, but I was raising queens, and I rarely wore long pants or shoes, and I had Russian bees. The time that was spent in working with the colonies, the control colonies that he was just taking care of as usual, and I'm not sure how many days this was or the season. He said it took 29 hours to work the control colonies. It took 2 hours more to put the Coumaphos in and take it out again. And it took a total of 36 and a half hours to do the IPM. That meant changing the queens and also making the screen bottom boards and putting them on. So once that's done, the screen bottom boards are on. It was only 27 and a half hours. It was less than all the other ones. The threshold data after that, in the treatments where the control, the Coumaphos and the IPM, the colonies reaching threshold, getting to a level that was dangerous. In the control, it was 41%, got to that level. In the Coumaphos, it was only 11%. And the IPM, 33% of them got to that level, which isn't very good until you look at what happened afterwards. The colonies that died in the control, 57% of them died, the ones that they did nothing for. In the Coumaphos ones, 44% of them died. In the IPM ones, 13% died. So it's showing that the miticides aren't the way to go, both because they're not that effective, the mites get resistance to them, and they're sublethal to the bees. Varroa mite detection methods. Drone brood examination. This is with a capping scratcher, and I'll show you pictures of it. The sugar shake method I just showed you, and I'll show you more pictures. And the sticky board test without an acaricide or without powdered sugar. This is just a raw sticky board test, natural fall. The thing with the sticky board test that Wynn was talking about is about 2% of the mites that are exposed, that are on their taxis walking around for a new place to go in to have more babies, about 2% of them fall every day. Now one day, maybe none fall, and the next day a whole bunch. We used to do 7 days, and then we knocked it, it was way too much dirt in there. We couldn't see what we were looking for. Then we did 5 days, and that didn't work, and then we did 3 days. And they decided 3 days was a good enough average to know, because if you do 1 day, you might get nothing, and the next day you might get 50, and the third day you might get 20. You could do like Wynn did and average them every day, but that's a lot more work. The capping scratching, you use a capping scratcher, which is a tool that looks like that. You dig it into the drone brood, you lever out the brood, and then you can examine for mites. That's not going to tell you how many mites you have. That's going to tell you how many mites are on a larva. You do that on the drone brood because that's where the mites are going to be. The Varroa detection for sugar shake. This is before we learned about doing it with water. You need powdered sugar, a wide mouth jar, and 8-mesh hardware cloth. Bees from the brood area. This is in Armenia, by the way. Bees from the brood area. Their hives weren't very strong, so I didn't take very many bees. You're supposed to take 300. You just mark on a jar and always take the same amount. Fill that jar up to the same level of bees, and that way it's relative to what you had before. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to count the bees. So you take bees from the brood area because that's where the mites are going to be. You use powdered sugar to coat the bees. Bees are like flies. They could walk on glass. They have little suctions on their feet. And when you put powdered sugar on the bees, they lose the suction. Also, the bees keep trying to groom themselves to get the powdered sugar off, like he's doing. and they're knocking the mites off all the time. So you wait about 5 minutes and then shake the jar gently during that time and then dump it over a white surface. Now it'd be better to dump it over water. And then you can count the mites. Screen bottom boards, my first screen bottom boards were solid boards that I just cut the center out and stapled in hardware cloth. Again, that's 8 mesh hardware cloth. Then I put a place underneath where I could slide a sticky board in. This is in Armenia again. They're counting mites. They had never learned about this before when I went there. Unfortunately, they were drinking vodka at the same time. So I don't know if the counts were right. This is about the economic thresholds, and this is Keith Delaplane's work. The mite levels will vary with the season. They'll grow a lot during the time that they're raising drones. They won't grow near as much when they're done raising drones. The numbers won't. The average density is that darker line at the bottom, and that's okay. This is sort of an economic threshold. When you get above that, they're going to start suffering, and this is a lethal threshold. So with mites or with beetles or with whatever pest you're talking about, there's different levels that we need to look at to know what we need to do. Just like with a mosquito. If you have a mosquito that lands on your forehead, you're going to kill it mechanically, but you're not going to use a sledgehammer. That'd be foolish. You're not going to use an axe either. You're going to just do that and it's gone. It's done. So it's the same thing with these. When we know what the infestation level is, if it's just one mite or one mosquito, you just take care of it mechanically. If it's a lot of mosquitoes, you might have to do something more. There's a lot of variables in knowing the thresholds, and Dr. Delaplane and I went round and round about this for years, to where he didn't call on me anymore and when he was giving lectures. But he came up with a bunch of thresholds that didn't have anything to do with seasons, and then later he decided that seasons make a difference. But with the sugar shake, depending on the time of year, 10 to 15 mites found in 300 bees is pretty much a conservative threshold. Now for me, I have a different threshold than all the other thresholds. Mine is whether I sleep well at night, but it's based on the same system. My threshold's lower. If I get 10 mites in a sugar shake, I'd be upset. Sticky board with a 72-hour, 3-day natural fall, assuming brood is available, because if brood isn't available, more mites are going to fall because they don't have any place to hide. 100 mites would be considered conservative. I would be freaking out if I had 60. This is a screen bottom board. This is a beekeeper that's a member of the association. He was one of the first ones. In fact, that was one of the first commercially bought screen bottom boards in Northwest Arkansas that I know of. The mites fall through that. I think it was Earl that explained that if they just fall to a solid bottom board, they're going to hitchhike back up. But if they fall through a screen, they're gone. Mechanical tools, I call these dumb methods for smart beekeepers. Dumb because the chemicals are pretty smart. They're killing a bug on a bug. With tracheal mites, they were killing a bug inside of a bug. That's like laser bombs. Natural mite fall, screen bottom board. You'd have to have a screen bottom board for that. It's easy. Powdered sugar, that's going to increase the number of mites that fall. So you just put powdered sugar between the frames and you'll have a lot more mites that fall. You wouldn't do that if you were counting them, but you would do that to control them. is periodically pushing the natural fall. Drone trapping was mentioned, but I'm going to explain it a little bit more. It is labor intensive. It's only for small beekeepers. Brood break, I told you a little bit about that. It's fairly easy to block the queen. This is the sugar dusting. And that's the bottom board after, or the sticky board after a sugar dusting. Drone trapping, having a frame with a lot of drone combs. Earl explained that a little while ago. Taking that, putting it in the brood area, letting the queen lay her eggs in there that are going to be male. And then the mites are, it's almost like magnets. The mites will go to those drone cells before they hatch, after they're sealed, but before they hatch, take them and put them in the freezer. Leave them in there for at least 24 hours. Take your capping scratcher and clean them out, or hose them out and put it back in the hive. If you do that 3 times in the spring, you're going to get rid of a whole bunch of mites. You're going to help the bees a lot. Another way of doing it, if you don't have drone brood, is put a short frame in a deep box. They'll build drone brood in the spring at the bottom of it. Then you can just cut that off and throw it away, or you can reuse it. Breaking the brood cycle, either blocking the queen, which would be caging her or keeping her on one frame with a queen excluder on both sides. Requeening is another way of blocking the queen. Kill the queen and give them a new queen, but wait a little while, but not long enough for them to make their own. So having a period of a week to 2 without young brood will knock down the Varroa mite population. Now the chemicals, the smart chemicals for not so smart beekeepers. Apistan I told you about, Checkmite I told you about, Apivar is the main name for the Amitraz product. The softer chemicals for smarter beekeepers, Oxalic Acid, used cautiously when broodless. Like Wynn and like Earl, I prefer the drip method. The first time I saw the fumigation method was also in Armenia. I ran like 20 yards away just to get away from it. These guys were dangerous. But a lot of people use it. The Mite Away quick strips is formic acid. Need to be careful with it. Use it cautiously. Only use formic acid if it's prepackaged. Apivar Life is the thymol-based little sponges. Apigard is thymol-based also. It's a cream. Looks like that. Commercial beekeepers buy it in tubs and distribute it themselves. Small beekeepers, they come in little teeny trays. You just peel the thing off and put it in. That's the Apivar Life, like little sponges. And you can see that there's a little bit of a rim around there that's added to leave room for it. The same thing with the quick strips. The quick strips now are thinner, so you can do it without a rim. This is just a chart showing it was made by the guy that makes the Mite Away and showing how effective it is. That's what the Apigard looks like. This is several years ago. I was doing some research for USDA and using the drip method. It was in the middle of the season, which doesn't make sense. And I told them that at the beginning. The oxalic acid, I think Wynn mentioned this, the oxalic acid kills all the exposed mites. Well, during the season, 80% of the mites are inside brood at any given time. So you put the drip in between, that's fine, you're going to kill that 20%, but you're going to leave 80. But if you do it during a broodless time, up until recently, we thought that it would kill a lot of them. Now that new paper that just came out says that it's not that effective. Genetic selection from local stock is what I prefer. And I teach raising queens overseas a lot because they always want me to bring them queens when I'm going someplace to do a consulting job. I won't bring queens to them. For one thing, you just don't bring biological things across borders like that. But also, their local bees are already accustomed to their fauna and flora and climate and topography and everything. They do better finding their own stock and raising the genetics that they want out of it. Russian bees are another selection that came from, like I said, Ukraine originally. The VSH gene is something that was developed down at the Baton Rouge Agricultural Research Station. In the New World Carnolians and the Minnesota Hygienics. Those are all resistant stocks. The VHS gene, the bees have a trait that they can tell when there's a mite in a cell and when that mite's reproducing. This one isn't quite closed yet, so they just walked over it. This one's closed, but she's not reproducing, so they left it and walked over it. This one's reproducing. The bee apparently senses a pheromone or something and is able to tell that it's reproducing and rips out the pupa of the bee, and the mites don't develop. And so it's a pretty neat system. And we're doing this in Northwest Arkansas. We're breeding for that trait. The people that developed it, which was John Harbaugh and Jeff Harris at the Baton Rouge lab, came up with this graph. And this is a frame of brood. The brown is just sealed brood. The blue ones have fertile mites in them, and the green ones have infertile mites in them that aren't reproducing. They took a frame like that and put it into a colony that had the Varroa sensitive hygienics. And what they got was that. So the bees were able to go in there, find out which cells had mites that were reproducing, and tear out those pupa, and then the mites didn't develop. IPM for viruses: don't let the mites or the beetles get out of control. Keep the colony happy and healthy. Be aware of fungicides, because fungicides help the viruses. Mechanical and biological controls for small hive beetle: keep your colonies strong. The beetles will always go for the weak colonies. So if you have a yard with 5 hives in it and one of them's weaker, it's the one that's going to gather all the beetles. They'll go to it. Use in-hive traps. Earl showed some pictures of some. This is one that I use. I also use the Swiffer pads. This is one that can be cleaned. The one that he showed, the Beetle Blaster, can't be cleaned very easily. This has a place for a lure that's just basically apple cider vinegar. And then you put oil here. When you close it up and hang it on a frame, the mites go in these little slits to get away from the bees and drown in the oil. Observe infestation levels, and you might have to do something more invasive, but probably not if you use this and if you put nematodes in the soil around your hives. Now there's 2 different kinds of nematodes. One of them is a vegetarian nematode that hurts the roots of plants in gardens, and the other one's a carnivorous nematode that like pupa. So the mites are the beetles when they become, they're first an egg and then they become a larva, and when that larva gets to a certain stage, it crawls out of the hive and goes down into the soil to pupate. So it pupates in the soil. When it's in the soil, if you have nematodes in the soil, they'll eat them. And they'll lay eggs on the carcass and make more nematodes. So a common, and by the way, that's called a biological weapon or biological control, nematodes. This is a mechanical control. Conclusions: hard chemicals are short-term solutions. IPM is sustainable and stretches out the time between needing to use and therefore the effectiveness of chemicals. The more tools available, the better. IPM works and is economical. Genetics are the long-term solution. But it takes a long time to get the genetics, so we have to use these other tools on the way. I was supposed to tell you how I do it, genetics, measurements, mechanics, biological controls, no chemicals in 22 years. This will be the 23rd year. Appreciations. I appreciate beekeepers who experiment with scientific basis. I appreciate a lot the researchers who look for and try to verify new methods. I'm not a researcher, I just help them. The queen breeders who are finding resistant mechanisms, and beekeepers who are willing to drink the water out of the box. So thank you. Rather than taking a break, we've got one very short presentation that our president is going to give just about the association. Some of you have asked when we're going to meet and how you can pay your dues and stuff like that. He's going to explain some of that, and then we're going to have door prizes. Did everybody get a ticket for a door prize? Did anybody not get a ticket? We've got 11 door prizes. So. Oop, that's not what I meant to do. I can just get rid of that one. Where's that coming? Oh, that is it. That's your presentation, sir. That advances.
Okay. So, I don't know how many, my name's Steve Oss, and I don't know how many are associated, but we are a not-for-profit organization, so it is here to benefit the community. Let's see, we are per purpose of, the purpose is to bring people together. I think we've accomplished that here. Good job. Share information and resources on beekeeping and honey harvesting. I think we've done a good job of that. Thank you, Wynn and Ed and Earl and others. Education. Seems like we've accomplished that today, wouldn't you all say? Maybe we got it. Conduct outreach programs, which I think we're continuously doing, and this is just one example. Mentor new beekeepers, which I think Earl is driving that program for us at the club, and we're going to have apprenticeships and mentors. People like Ed and Wynn and Earl will, in different varying ways, help new beekeepers learn methods. I offered my services, but the only way I'm doing is if you want to come to my house and lift my boxes and look inside my boxes. I'll be happy to tell you what you're looking at. But anyway, that's a good program, the mentor. Encourage future beekeeping through the apprentice, same thing. I think Earl is driving both of those for us. Learn about beekeeping through. We have a monthly meeting. It is the second Monday evening of each month. The 14th of March is the first one, right? And it's at the Washington County Extension. Does everybody know where that is? It's kind of over by, if you know where the University Farm is, it's kind of past that. There's a United rental place over there, and kind of by going towards the Sam's Club, it's kind of right back up in there. It's a pretty easy location to get to. Fellowship, which and this is an example. Education programs, example. We do have a web page which is being updated and revamped regularly, nwabeekeepers.com. Back to the earlier, you're getting a lot of bylines here for mentorship and apprentice programs, workshops and outings. I think we do a visit a beekeeper. Wynn does it at his house a lot of times, right? Where you go out and see his hives. We do have a swarm program. Jim Pickett, which I think Jim is the founder of the club, right? Jim does, he manages our swarm activity. So when somebody has a swarm, and so you can get your name on the list if you're in the club, if you're on the list, and Jim can call you to go catch the swarm and so on. We have harvesting equipment and some other stuff. I think it's mostly just harvesting equipment, right, Wynn?
Yes.
Yep, and so it wind manages that. So when the honey season comes, if your bees made some honey and you want to get it, he's got the equipment to get it out. For those that were here during he is particular about it being clean. We do have equipment for sale occasionally, and we get notified, and I think it's put on the website. Potentially, we have the opportunity to bond together, be a group and buy together equipment and bees and so on. Workshops and outings again. So, and then this is a big one, just sharing our experiences, kind of networking. And so that's us. It is $15 a year. I don't know if everybody's joined up. I think there's some other benefits that you get for joining, but that's a pretty inexpensive price to join the club and get access to a lot of knowledge and what have you. So good job for putting the class on. I appreciate everybody's hard work. There we go. Thank you.
You all will come on the 14th. The meeting will start either 6:30 or 7. We'll get a notice of it. I've got everybody's emails. I hope if anybody has given me your email, I'm sure you do.
I think are you going to do question and answer, or you're going to go right to the raffle or the giveaways?
What do you want to do first? Question and
Let's
answer?
let's get the prizes. Everybody wants a prize.
I think it's enough.
Okay, we'll do whatever.
Question, do you have questions?
Or we
I know
just-
that this was a difficult session because there was a lot of information and a lot of problems, but they're they can be taken care of without big problem. And you've got people to help you if you join the club.
There's a lot of ways to keep bees. Edge way is definitely a good way, and long-term a great solution to keeping bees, to do it through hygienics. I'm a big believer in hygienics. You just got to get in and do it. So if you get in there and do it and learn and see, it's kind of the fun of it. You're a curious person. It's a good hobby.
Yeah, and Ed mentioned that oxalic acid, according to one study, was not effective. I think that's BS. and I work in the poultry sector for 42 years, and we do also a lot of experiments and trials and tests in order to prove one thing or another thing, and you see conflicting results. And the reason is mostly the way the tests are being set up. So I mentioned it a little bit, but if you use oxalic acid when there is no brood, and you saw my numbers, you get a tremendous drop in mites if you have a very heavy load.
It's been used in Europe for
infection.
years. And oxalic acid for sure works, and one study doesn't mean anything. As far as I'm concerned, science is interesting. And the chemical uses of chemical, I think Ed is exactly right. I worked in the commercial beekeeping business, and we used all the chemicals, every one of them, prophylactically and reactively. And when somebody's entire livelihood is on the line, and it's easier to just do it, but everybody involved knows it's not the right thing to do. Everybody. And so the really good beekeepers are super controlled about how they do it. It's all very measured. The sloppy beekeepers, it's kind of haphazard, and when you see it done, you just shake your head. But so their livelihoods are dependent on it. They can't afford 50% losses, and they're doing the economic threshold is slightly different than perhaps what Ed showed you. But we're not commercial beekeepers. We're all hobby beekeepers. And so we have the luxury of being more attentive to our bees and taking care of them and really observing and measuring, and then using hygienics and other techniques to do it, and other non-chemical methods. And so I do encourage that. I have chemicals at my house. I will use them if I think I need them. But this year I didn't treat with anything. Some will die. That's the way it goes. The ones that live, they're better queens. And that is what we breed from. And there was a queen that I gave dead last year that had not had any chemicals. It did very well and was a very healthy hive. And so genetics is a big thing, and I have had Harborough, the person that developed the VSH queens. I've had his queens for years, and they are successful. But even they had issues where they wouldn't be quite as productive when they were put through the same rigors of a commercial beekeeping venture. They couldn't withstand the stresses that were introduced by trucking bees all over the country. But they did well. They didn't have a lot of Varroa Mite. They just couldn't produce the same quantity of honey. So it's kind of an interesting way off. But anyway.
Yeah, and what Steve just mentioned about, some of his bees might die, that's that 007
That's right.
not treat thing. And I said that there's an advantage to that, is that you have the survivors.
That's right.
And those survivors are going to breed more survivors.
And
So if everybody had to let their bees die and we only had 10% of the bees left, those 10% would be good and we could repopulate it with it, but nobody wants to do that.
Well, it's too dramatic. But for us as hobby beekeepers, if you have 4 hives and 2 of them die, you just split the other 2. You won't get a lot of honey production, but you'll get healthier bees, and so it's a long game. You just have to be playing the long game. If you're only in it for honey production, then you have to do other things. And so there's a happy medium you just have to land on.
You have to make a choice.
It is a good choice, yeah. So anyway, so what else, Ed? Questions?
Yes?
You said last week that you would maybe mention something about keeping bees in an urban setting.
Yeah, I thought I brought something on that. Yeah, different cities have different ordinances. Fayetteville's ordinance is that you can have, on a regular sized lot, you can have 2 hives. If they're within 100 foot of your fence, which is of your property line, it has to be fenced. If you have more land, like I've got a big lot, I can have up to 4 hives on my lot. So.
And urban beekeeping can be a challenge. So if you've ever been around a trash can at a sporting event and you see all the honeybees in there, and then you talk to somebody that lives on a concrete lot and they have bees and they're going, my bees made 100 pounds of honey. You go, it's Coca-Cola. And so, it is a challenge. And so you have to think about where you live. And I think Wynn is a prime example of this. He has plants and flowers planted all around. Ed lives in a place where there's flowers and stuff around. If you live in if you lived in Manhattan, it becomes a bit of a challenge to visualize where the bees are getting their food sources. And so you do have to keep that in mind when you're putting your bees somewhere. If you're putting them in a place where there's nothing to eat, and then you expect them to fly miles and miles to get, everybody says they'll fly 3 miles. Well, think about how many trips that is and how far that is, and oh my gosh, that's overwhelming. Commercial beekeepers will set the bees in the middle of where it is. They do not have to fly. They can walk. I had bees sitting in Wisconsin in goldenrod, or what's the stuff in the fall that we get? Goldenrod. And they literally could walk out of their hive and walk onto the plant, and they made a tremendous amount of honey. Now, if they had to fly, 1.5 miles, they'd have made a little less. And so you do have to keep in mind, in relation to an urban setting, what is it out there for them to eat and what can they get? Because otherwise you have to supplement their diet. Anybody else?
By the way, people do keep hives in Manhattan.
They do.
And I think Earl said that people in town here will make more honey than they do at his place.
Yeah, and it's coming straight out of the Coke pot. That's just my opinion.
I struggle, I have a few hives. I struggle with when and what size entrance to have on when. I mean, I've got the small ones on now. Do you move up to the next size? Do you completely remove it in the summer?
When you're asking 3 people, you're going to get 6 answers.
And I let the mouse guard up on one all year long to have a problem with it, but I probably baby mine because I try to keep it, I just feel like I keep it warm. And then the other question I had when you talked about the bee being able to pull out the larva that had the mites, I opened my hive, I have a horizontal hive in the house.
We have door prizes coming, there's 11 of them, so if you walk away, you're not gonna get one.
But I have a horizontal hive that I built a couple of years ago, and got a natural hive in it, a swarm in it, and I don't know what they are. But I've opened that hive in December and January, February, and every time I open it to check it, I'll notice a worker or a bee taking out a pupa, a larva, and I'm like, what are they doing, you know? And I didn't understand what they were doing. So do you think that's what they're doing now? Would they be doing that?
That's unusual that they'd be taking out a pupa or a larva this time of year.
That
They're cannibalizing the brood.
Well,
And that's what I would tell you they're probably doing, is they're
they wouldn't
probably,
be taking it out though.
They take it out,
eating
this
it.
bee was.
They're dragging it out of the hive.
This bee, when I pulled that, lifted the box open, I noticed when I thought maybe it was taking a wax moth larva out, but no, it was the bee. It took it and flew off. And I've seen it the last 3 months I've opened it, and I'm like.
Yeah, that's odd for two reasons, because one reason there shouldn't be a larva or a pupa in January. Maybe about now there should start to be some.
I've seen it, and I was gonna try to picture of it, you know, you got your suit and you can't do
Yeah,
anything like
when
that.
bees are hungry, they'll cannibalize larvae and brood, but they'll eat them there.
Right.
And
There's
they
honey
shouldn't-
in it, and I fed, but it was just strange, I didn't know. But the opening thing, I can't get a handle on, and I don't know, I feel uncomfortable to completely open in the summer, just because I think it's an easy entrance for wax moths.
They have really good equipment.
Pardon?
Is your equipment real good and tight?
Yeah, very tight.
There, I don't have time to explain it, but you can make a trap in your yard for wax moths.
I've got that.
Okay,
I've
with
got 'em
out
out
of
there,
bottles?
yeah.
Okay.
I don't think the entrance really matters. You can make it as small as you want year-round. One bee can go in and out. They'll line up. Ventilation becomes an issue. If it's too warm, then they'll beard on the outside tremendously, and then if they're doing that, they can't be as productive. So it's really about if you're trying to produce honey, in which case you want to have unimpeded access to come and go, and so you need to have the entrance wide enough to where a number of bees can move in and out of your hive efficiently. If they're lining up to get through the door, that's inefficient. And so, but it is not going to stop it. And so I'm a fairly lazy person, so if I have one opening, but some of my equipment's really tight, and most of it that I had for years has got holes everywhere anyway, and they get in and out. But good tight equipment, you have screen bottom boards, so you have plenty of ventilation.
Yeah, and I pull those out in the summer to give ventilation, but they'll still beard on the outside.
Yeah, but I mean, that's my answer to that question. So Ed may have.
And then one other thing I had trouble with is a powdered sugar thing, because these are kind of like my pets, but just what happens to that powdered sugar on their eyes?
I wonder the same thing.
You know, I mean, like, is it like diatomaceous earth? Is it gonna make them blind? Or, 'cause it's a lot of sugar.
Diatomaceous earth would definitely.
Yeah, but I just wondered, what happens to the sugar? Because I've put it in there before, and I'm like, wow, man, you know, I wouldn't like that.
Yeah, they don't seem to like it when you give them powdered sugar.
Don't they clean that off? Do they have eyelids? I don't know.
They lick each other.
Yeah, they clean themselves, but you'll see white bees flying around after you've done this for a while.
You have a question, Beck?
One of my gardening newsletters that I get suggested interesting plants, fun plants, and one of them was hops. So I researched a bit to see how the bees would feel about that, and some studies indicate that if the bees are exposed to the hops, they have some resistance to the Varroa Mite.
Yeah, what is the stuff that they make from the hops? It's
Does that make sense?
what is that? No, but they make there's a, what's the real sticky one that they have, the miticide? They make a miticide out of the hops product. I can't remember the name of it right now. It's real sticky. What is it?
Hop guard.
Hop guard. Well, there you go, hop guard. And so maybe that's what they're correlating it to, but I don't know. Hop guard is kind of a,
All the chemicals that we have were originally from botanicals.
right.
You know, like if you want a lot of oxalic acid, and a friend of mine and I were going to study this and we never did, go get the flowers from sumac. You know, we thought, well, we could smoke the hives with sumac flowers.
I didn't get the impression that the bees were treated with anything that had that chemical in it, but it was just visiting the hops that allowed them to have some resistance.
I don't know if hops is sticky or not.
I don't have any earthly idea.
There was a beekeeper, I think he was a beekeeper one time. He was trying to get me to grow a lot of hops. I had a lot of land at the time. And he said it made the best honey, but I'd never heard of hops honey before.
Me either. Don't you have to grow that on big vines or big strings?
25 feet.
Yeah, it's probably cool.
That's all right.
Seems pretty neat.
I just need to find a hop.
Oh. But you,
Any other questions? Okay, we're going to draw some things. Why don't you draw? Okay, this ends with 895. 895. We've got a bunch of things here. And by the way, if any of you want this little guide, these are not part of the thing.
so the first thing you have to do is pick another one for the next person.
Yeah.
So pick one out. If it's you, we'll think it's rigged. Just give it to Ed, he'll read it off, and you pick your gift.
Okay, let me explain the gifts real fast. We've got some seeds that were given by a participant here from Tedford Farms.
Okay.
There's some goldenrod, and what was the other one?
Two types of goldenrod. It's a stiff and a showy goldenrod.
Wow. And then we've got 2 certificates for 6 months of the American Bee Journal. 2 certificates that are $10 for the bee supply place that's down in Russellville. 2 hive tools, 1 regular flat hive tool and 1, I forget what they're called. I like this kind. These are good for lifting frames. Okay, and is this the ticket you gave me?
Yeah.
That's 900.
That's yours.
There you go.
I'm not going to tell you what it all is anymore. Pick a ticket and I'll read the next one.
Take the next one to the Ed.
Get one out of here.
There you go.
Okay, get something. Whatever you want. This says Joni Gray on it, and it's 891.
There you go.
You have to pick a ticket first, and then pick a prize.
So what do I need for those?
I don't know. What are you going to do?
Goldenrod seeds next time.
You can get 2 of them. There are 2 different kinds.
Oh, so I
They're in pairs.
Oh, okay, so I get these two.
Yeah.
Thank
There you go.
Thank you.
I probably should have taken the hive tool. Ken's going to be mad at me.
That's all right.
Well,
Well, maybe he'll win.
keep your mat outside. This isn't Ken's. It's 885.
There you go. A winner. Did you get directions? Good.
She wants seeds or what? Yeah, get her those. This is 893.
You take 2, go pack the pair.
The pair of 2 different kinds of flowers. 293. You snooze, you lose. You lost. These have names on them. Justin Williams. It's 897.
Good job.
She, when we checked in, she wrote in on the back of her.
These are $10 gift certificates. This is 6 months of the subscription, 1 tool, or seeds. Good choice. That's what I would do. 903.
How old is your dog?
She's 5. She's 2.
Baby. Poodle for a long time.
These are 6 months of the subscription, $10 certificates for the bee supplies. Okay. Carissa Duncan. Ah, I bet she doesn't choose seeds. Subscription, yeah.
And this gold tile grow here?
It will. They're grown out on Wyman Road, so the school sun plant, they'll get really.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Like the northern stuff? I love that stuff.
Tracy, number 889. She lost. That gives everybody a better chance. 888, Angela.
There you go.
You've got seeds, subscription, certificates of bee supply. Did you get one of these already?
You're right.
Yep. You. Natalie.
There you go.
The only one? Did you fill yours out?
Yeah.
Didn't know you put your name on it.
Seeds, subscription for 6 months or a $10 certificate.
Here's mine.
Okay. Nancy, why are we getting over here?
In the chart.
It's ticket number 890.
She gave me her ticket.
Okay. Come on up. You're the
She
winner.
gave it to you, or she
Yeah.
said you could pick something for her?
I guess I had to find her. Where'd she at?
Good job.
Go ahead and pick another ticket for me, this one.
Take what you want. Seeds are good.
That's a gift certificate for $10 at the supply place or seeds.
There you go.
Matthew,
There you go.
you guys got 2.
You get seeds.
Yeah, seeds are
Seeds are always good.
That's good. I like girl things.
2 of them. They're the same thing.
They're the same?
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
That's very generous, honestly. It's really cool.
Good deal. Last but not least,
Bobby.
Yeah.
Bobby,
What's the number?
number 894.
oh, there you go.
Great. You would have liked a hive tool, but you get seeds.
I got plenty.
I've got a hive tool within reach no matter where I am. Yeah. Please take more catalogs. If you didn't get one of these, come and get one, and come to the meeting on the 14th of March.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.